like to call the board meeting of the Menlo Park Fire Protection District Board of Directors to order at 7:07 p.m. on April 18th, 2023. Roll call, please, Michelle. Director Bernstein.
Present.
Director Bloom.
Here.
Director Jones.
Here.
Director Crowley. Present. Director Swan.
Here.
Okay, we'll stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I will now open up public comment number 1. We have any public hearings. If any member, there's no member of the public here. Do you have any? So now, close public number 1. And then I'm just going to report out of closed session that there are no reportable items from the closed session. And then now we'll go to the chief's report. Chief?
Thank you, Director Crowley, and to our staff that's here, members of the board, and our public out there that's listening. Happy to share with you our April fire chief's report. As we've done in the past, just talk briefly about COVID impacts. As we're finding more and more, it's having fewer and fewer impacts on us. Currently, no employees out with COVID and no impacts on our ambulance wall times and our transport issues that we previously had during the height of the epidemic. Station 4 update. It's open. The engine and the truck are in there with the challenges, especially from our winter storms. Both in the moisture they put in the earth and with getting PG&E to come help us at the fire station versus restoring power to everywhere. They were a little bit delayed, so we're waiting for PG&E. We expect them to be doing their things at the site at the end of this month. So we're looking at a late August, early September grand opening. That's when before we, yeah, so it's, and my guess is before we're done with it, it'll be probably fall. In the fall, but it's still moving forward, and super excited to share that with the public once we have everything all cleaned up and everything set there. Recruitment updates, just an update on what's happening with us in our recruitments and with HR. We have a senior management analyst right now that is going to be for our working out of our task force. We've identified the candidates. We should be starting soon as we're working out the details. So excited to have this individual on board. The HR analyst position is for the position that used to be occupied by Kristen McDonald. We've done a recruitment. We have interviews scheduled for May 2nd. We have 7 candidates that we're going to be doing in-person interviews with. And for the assistant fire marshal position, those interviews are actually going to occur tomorrow. We have 5 candidates for that. Other items going on, just an update on the management audit. I had talked about coming back to the board with a report. It wasn't ready for prime time for this month's meeting, so I'll present a report out on all of the recommendations and our status on them, and we can have a discussion with the board about prioritizing some of those. County dispatch services. This is you may or may not be aware of, but I'm about to make you aware of the conversations that have been occurring with the County of San Mateo. They currently provide dispatch services for all fire and EMS services in the County of San Mateo and some police agencies other than sheriff. So we were approached by the CAO, I think that's his title, Mike Callaghan. Chief Executive, CEO. Okay. He had been working with his fiscal staff and evaluating the true cost of dispatch services and discovered that they were pretty significantly, from their perspective, subsidizing fire and law enforcement dispatch services. So Mike has approached a number of city managers and some of the fire district chiefs, asking for us to, at least in some respect, make them more whole. So just to share some preliminary numbers, with the board. Yeah, the county broke down all their expenses. They eliminated from their calculations, you know, a lot of their overhead costs. They then pass those down to us in their cost allocations, but if their cost of staffing and maintaining those facilities, they calculated out the total cost for fire was approximately $6 million. And through the ambulance JPA, the current contribution from fire was around $2 million. So there's a delta there of about $4 million. So that's what, in their estimation, they are subsidizing every year. There's a similar amount on the police side, which obviously doesn't involve us. So, and Mike has made a pitch that he's willing for the county to continue to subsidize a portion of it and for it to be, as he calls it, a loss leader. But he would like some kind of consensus amongst all of the cities and the districts to come together and make a proposal back to him as to what that could look like. So we have a Zoom meeting next Wednesday that's being hosted by the Redwood City Manager and the folks that would have some skin in the game. So we're gonna have a conversation, see where it goes. Having sat in the seat previously of running a fire and EMS dispatch center, I'm not surprised by those numbers. Our costs were even significantly more than the county's cost that they're proposing, passing down to us, and we had a similar call volume. So anyway, I will put a placeholder in our budget just for an approximate number. So that's not going to be in the budget presentation tonight, but I'll have more information after next Wednesday's meeting. I'll keep all the board informed. So that's in essence what's going on with.
Chief, could you just elaborate on that a little bit? It seemed to me that they were being paid out of the ambulance contract. And are you saying they only get $2 million out of the ambulance contract in total?
That's, yes, out of whatever's going to the ambulance JPA. I don't know what the number is.
Well,
Director Carlos, is that
so I
right?
think the dispatch piece is a 50 should, under the contract should be more of the 50-50 cost sharing. And over the years, and when I talked to Mike, is and he actually, we talked, I think before your meeting happened, that that cost has gone up over the years, but the cost for the cities and the fire districts didn't, or the cost sharing piece didn't go up. Does that make sense?
I don't know. I'm not saying you don't.
Okay, sorry. Never mind. I didn't think-
Let me share. No, that's fine. The amount that is, you know, AMR contributes to the ambulance JPA. I don't remember what, maybe it's $4 million a year. All of the agencies that are in the ambulance JPA get some monies that come back to them for paramedic services. For us, staffing paramedics on our engines, and in essence, stopping the clock for AMR and some of their calls. So some of that money comes back to the districts. Some of it's used to purchase equipment. Some of it's used for administrative fees in the JPA. And a portion, $2 million of it goes to the county for the dispatch services. That $2 million that has been going to the county wasn't necessarily based on actual cost or true cost. It was just the number that had been generally accepted for the last, I don't know, long time. And so now I think there's some initiatives that the county has, and they realize that there's a pretty significant shortfall there, and they're looking to fill that to help them probably fund some other more meaningful things other than subsidizing our dispatcher.
And I can't
So how
remember.
many,
Go on.
so how many fire agencies or others that are in this pool of 6 million?
There are by the agencies in question are Central County Fire, Coastside Fire, Colma County Fire Department, Menlo Park, North County Fire, Redwood City, San Bruno, San Mateo Consolidated, and Woodside. Those are the agencies. South City is separate. Since they do transport, they get billed separately, but they will also have to share.
But let me just add to that, Robert, there are 4 fire districts, right? So the other fire like Central County Fire, which is not a fire district, that's Hillsborough and Burlingame, right? So they're looking at those particular cities for them, okay? And the same with San Mateo, Foster City, and Belmont. There are 3 cities that make up that consolidated department, and so those 3 cities would pay. Our fire district would pay. So the cities within our fire district wouldn't pay. It would come out of our budget instead of the, Menlo Park, Atherton, and Palo Alto's budgets. Does that help?
Why is that? Why would they
Because
pay?
we're a fire district.
But why wouldn't the city pay? They get it.
No, but the dispatch, we're providing that service.
You know what I can do is, getting kicked in the shin by Steve, I can agendize it
Okay,
as
I
a
think
board
we
discussion
should.
for the next meeting, and I can
Sorry.
explain, like you had questions, Director Bernstein, about why wouldn't East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Atherton pay, and a bigger, broader discussion. I think I can explain all of it, but I didn't properly agendize it.
As part of your discussion item, I'd like to know, if the CAD system has improved for fire services, because there was a huge issue there, between that, and I think now that they want more money, maybe it needs to work a little bit better. And then, also, Chief, you had the idea with the PG&E. They have that form where people are identified as disabled.
Right.
And maybe they can, since the county communications has signed an agreement with PG&E, that they can provide that in their CAD because they dispatch our services. So, let's get something out of it.
Yeah,
In
so,
fact, that was at our meeting too, the meeting in East Palo Alto, where people had said that they had health issues and they weren't identified. So I think we need to, maybe try to get
so
that.
we should.
I will broadly agendize that so we can talk about all of this.
Great.
So I have one more thing then
Yeah.
for the agenda item.
Sure.
If you could discuss with those agencies that are now providing dispatch, like Atherton and Menlo Park Police and so forth.
So,
See what it might cost us to piggyback on their dispatch.
Well, so I'm gonna create that ad hoc committee that we can probably talk about that, so that'll be later on. And
But he's
then,
gonna have a meeting next week,
But yeah,
and I'm worried that we're gonna have an agreement in place where we're paying more money, and they may not wanna do it.
we will come back before I agree to anything. I'll come back to the board and get board approval for buying and we'll talk about options, right?
I mean, for like a wide range of options.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because we're still not getting, according to the last report we had, dispatch was taking twice as long to dispatch as is allowed under state standards.
Right.
2 minutes instead of 1 minute.
Right, it would, yes, this will provide us with an opportunity to, for some leverage and for a voice at the table if we get to that point, but I will make that a broad agenda item.
Okay. Atherton
Atherton ADAP, I'm trying to remember, Director Bloom and I attended an invitation meeting, from, George Rodgers, to talk about and discuss ADAP. They've been having some organizational changes over there. Tom Owen has stepped down as the ADAP president or chair. He's still involved in the group. But yeah, I'm trying to remember, the police chief was there, one of the commanders, is Bill Wigmer, the mayor or vice mayor? Mayor. And we just had a discussion about how our program is going to interact with theirs, how we support the program. Everybody is, right now, as things are in transition, everybody's super keen on us bringing on board Heather Keller, who is not the answer to everything, but just a partial answer. So she's the only one left standing right now in the East Rec community. And we're trying to be very protective of her so that she doesn't become overwhelmed by everybody's needs, but I haven't met her yet. She's awesome. I'll bring her to the next meeting and introduce her to all of our board here in the community. She actually, on my next item, had a meet and greet today at our Yellow House with our volunteer communities. provide you an update on how that went at the next meeting. We didn't have any significant incidents occur, but we have some upcoming events also that are happening. Coming up this Saturday, we have Earth Day at Menlo Atherton High School. There's gonna be, we're gonna have some preparedness booths out there. We have a safety fair at 11:05 Valparaiso. It's the Mormon Church. That's going to be on April 29th from 11 to 3. The Earth Day celebration is Saturdays from 11 to 4. May 7th, we have a Cinco de Mayo celebration at Bell Street Park. We're going to have some booths set up there, some community outreach. Also happening, our labor folks are reviving a program called Rebuilding Together that we've been doing in the past. They've selected a house on Larkspur Drive in East Palo Alto that will be culminating on a work day there at that house on April 29th. There's some other work days also that are going to be available. So if anyone's interested, I can share information with you. I'm sure they would love to have participation from our board. We also have going on this week a Mobex drill out at our warehouse site. So this is where they're building what they call their base of operations. So it's a big event going on for the whole week. There's a lot of folks out there. If you're interested in going by and seeing what they do, tomorrow I heard is a prime day to go view some of their operations. That is the conclusion of my chief's report. Other than the county dispatch services, any other questions?
You went to the Peninsula Volunteers thing too.
I did go.
For Meals on Wheels.
Yes, I did. Yes, Director?
I couldn't hear what.
He was mentioning that I had gone, we both went to the Peninsula Volunteers was having a breakfast, champions breakfast, where they were really sharing some of the good work they did with the Meals on Wheels program.
It was I think their 40th year celebration for Meals on Wheels. You're telling where did you go on that ride along?
I didn't go on the ride along, but I had the loaded tater tots.
Chief, what was the date again on the rebuild?
It's April 29th, though there's some other opportunities. They said for some work days leading up to it.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Any comments? Okay, then let's go to the consent calendar. Does anyone want to pull up anything from the consent calendar?
I have a question.
You want to pull something?
Yeah.
Which one?
Number 2.
Okay, and then Robert, you have a question?
Yeah, we finance it, and whether to put off in that, I can get a brief answer, but if I need to pull it off,
For the treasurer's report?
item number 3.
Yeah, okay, why don't we pull that one? Okay, so then, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar item number 4, which is approval resolution declaring seasonal leave of public nuisance?
Yeah, I don't think I heard. Director Jones, you pulled the minutes?
You pulled you pulled item 2, which is the minutes, and Robert pulled number 3, which is the treasurer's report. Thanks. So I'm asking for a motion to approve item 4 on the consent calendar.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Can you just thank John Johnson for putting this report together, please? Yeah. Okay, roll call, please.
Director Bernstein?
Aye.
Director Queen?
Aye.
Director Jones?
Aye.
Director Solana?
Aye.
Director Cross?
Aye. So that motion carries unanimously. So let's go to item number 2, the special board, all the minutes for the last month. That's what we saw.
Yes, my comment relates only to the regular board meeting minutes, which is the second set of minutes in this packet. And I'm looking at page 2 of those minutes. Item number 7. And I'm in no way suggesting that I wouldn't support Director Ferrari for being on the LAFCO board, but I don't think it's correct that we took any kind of vote or straw poll or anything that said the board supports nominating Director Kelly. I think it would be more technically correct to say the board will consider the item when the nomination process begins.
Hmm,
I could be wrong, but I don't recall us taking a vote or anything.
no, I think there was a consensus on that, though.
I didn't speak on it. I think some other people didn't speak on it. Again, I actually would support that, but that wasn't what happened at that meeting.
What did you say, Michelle? Nothing. Whatever you.
No, I was just gonna say, I thought there was an informal consensus, but I don't think we did a formal vote based on Stephen Miller's comment that said there's a formal nomination process that comes up later, and we would formally do it at that point in time.
Yeah.
So I think it was an informal consensus, but it was not a.
Well, if we had the words informal or something, that would be fine. I'm just trying to make it, this makes it sound like it was,
A done deal.
Yeah.
yeah.
So if I could suggest a small edit, what if before the current language, you just added the words, there was informal consensus that.
Okay.
Okay.
Move, we approve the minutes with the modification as discussed on item 7.
Okay. Okay. Any more discussion? Any roll call, please? Hold on one more time.
And just to be clear, we're
Yes.
voting on all of the minutes that are in this.
Right,
item.
right. So
So Director Bloom made the motion and who seconded?
Director Jones seconded.
I think I need a hearing aid.
Okay.
Either we could, pronounce our comments a little louder.
Thank you.
Roll call.
Okay, Director Bernstein,
Aye.
Director Bloom,
Aye.
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Solana,
Aye.
Director Crawley.
Aye. Okay, so item number 3, which Director Jones pulled off, which is to accept the treasurer's report for the month ended February 28, 2023.
Just a point of clarification is, on page, 32, this is 4 of 8. Yeah, Landon's not here. Where it says transfer in and out, and I noticed there's a dollar amount there that was, budgeted and as well as was, estimated annualized for 22-23. How many, the question is, how many transfer out took place in 22-23? To this particular,
Sorry, Director Jones, you're referring to what page?
page 4 of 8,
Page
which is page 13.
Page
overall
4.
Of the report,
Okay.
Under the capital improvement project.
on the transfer out. Is this a one-time, did this happen one time in 22-23 season, or?
So for 22-23, the transfer in is what we budgeted initially. For the transfer out, we haven't done anything yet for capital improvements project. So transfer out meaning we're actually transferring it to different major funds. So let's say we lack funding on the general fund based on the previous year's budget. We would probably, in order to balance the budget and the actual expected for the year, we will do some transfer out from the capital improvements project. So that's one part of the options that we can do. So as of now, we don't have anything yet that would make me believe that we're going to have like any transfer outs to any of other major funds from the CIP fund.
So help me out here. So I'm sorry I didn't throw your question out. I'm trying to get an understanding over like last 5 years or so. Whatever the budget is that normally transferred out at the end of the year.
No. So let's say for transfer in, let's talk about transfer in first. So transfer in, let's say at the beginning of the process, of the budget process, we do have like a balancing strategy where we actually balance the sources of funds versus the uses of funds. Sources of funds could be revenues and the reserves. And the uses could be the transfer outs, which could be the transfer in here because we're talking about the general fund, and of course the expenditures. So when we do the balancing strategy, let's say we figure out, the excess between revenues and expenditures is let's say 1 million. So that 1 million initially, that's what we budget. And that's what we transfer. If everything goes well, that's what we transfer out from the general fund to the CIP. But at the end of the year, when we figure out, let's say, from our general fund, we have like a remaining balance of like 16 million unassigned, fund balance. That's where we would actually allocate that to the different reserves. And you would see basically like a good portion of that 16 million or whatever the amount would be transferred out to the CIP fund. So at the beginning of the year, there's a transfer that's budgeted that we do, and then at the end of the year as well, when we do the analysis, we will also do that as well.
So in other words, you only do once a year.
It's not once a year, so we can do like quite a few times a year depending on the need, basically. So but most of the time we do it once during the start of the year, and then once again at the end of the year. So roughly, I would say like at least twice a year we do that, like to start it.
Thanks.
Any other questions regarding the executive session?
No, the only comment I'd make for Robert's benefit is that the committee the finance committee is working with staff to get a more detailed forecasted budget on capital improvements. So I get your question was more process-based, but on the topic of capital improvements, further out forecast around capital budgets.
Right. Well, that's what it was.
Okay, so that's work in progress between the committee and staff.
Good enough. Thanks.
Okay, is there a motion to approve item 3 on the consent calendar, which is to accept the treasurer's report for the month ending February 28th, 2023?
I'll make one to it doesn't.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any other discussion? Roll call, please, Michelle. Dr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Dr. Bloom?
Aye.
Dr. Jones?
Aye.
Dr. Crowley? Aye.
No, Director Solana. Oops, I did that wrong. Sorry about that. That's Director Crowley.
Okay, that motion carries. And now to the regular agenda item, number 5. Accept the terms of the first memorandum of understanding between the San Mateo County International Association of Firefighters Local 2400 District 13, the Battalion Chief Unit, and the Menlo Park Fire Protection District, and approve a resolution authorizing the chief to execute the MOU. So Francine or the chief?
I will let Francine handle it. It should be a pretty straightforward and easy process. So
Good evening, Board of Directors. So we would like to request the IFF District 13's first memorandum of understanding. IFF District 13 represents the district battalion chief, which is 6 positions. The MOU, the draft MOU was unsigned, and that sunshine period expired on March 24th, 2023. The district utilized Eddie Kreisberg to conduct the negotiations for this first MOU. This is a 1-year MOU with the battalion chief with no across-the-board wage increases. The big material items for this MOU include a change in the backfill stipend to instead of paying at the average rate, you're paying at the actual employee rate for the backfill stipend, and then establishing a 5-step range instead of just an open range with progression through the steps. There's no fiscal impact as the wages for this have already been budgeted in the current fiscal year. Looking for any questions?
Well, let me just ask, I don't think, did we get rid of the terminology backfill stipend?
Yes,
Could you use the correct one?
overtime.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, is there a motion to accept the terms and also approve this resolution authorizing the fire department to execute the MOU? Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? Okay, roll call please.
Dr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Dr. Bloom?
Aye.
Dr. Jones?
Aye.
Director Solana?
Aye.
Dr. Crowley?
Aye, so that motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to item 6, which is to preview and discuss the district's fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget and full-time equivalent staffing level. So I don't know if Elaine.
I'll start it and then I'll handle it, hopefully to kind of tee it up for Elaine and what our hopes are for this. So this whole packet has been reviewed by the finance committee. There had been some requests from our board for the board to get an early look at the budget packet before the meeting when we typically move for review and approval. So that's what this is. Our hope is that we don't take a deep dive into all of the program budgets tonight, but that if you have questions, you can either share them with staff here, we can get them answered for you for the May meeting. But I think a good portion of the conversation here will also deal with some of the things Elaine has done since he's arrived with some new revenue, with philosophy, if we want to call it that, and some other items, but I won't steal all of Elaine's thunder. So I'm going to turn it over to Elaine now. And there probably will be some changes, minor changes between what's presented here tonight and what we have in our May budget. And I will make sure that we highlight any of those changes before we re-present the item. So with that, over to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, everyone again. So for the preliminary budget, so as Chief mentioned, so these are just all preliminary. So meaning when we do the formal adoption, the formal adoption of the preliminary budget in May, you would see like maybe like differences depending on what we have been discussing on the back end, basically like the dispatch services, cost that the Chief just mentioned and other few initiatives that we were thinking about. So those are not yet available at this time, but then again, as we mentioned, we were going to make those changes in the May meeting and make sure that those are all highlighted. So I'm gonna give basically an overall view, like a high level overview of of the overall budget for the general fund, the CIP fund, and the special revenue fund. And after that, maybe we can have Q&A for some of the things that you may want to clarify or ask. So for the general fund, so we implemented different, not entirely different, like a different way of methodology and forecasting the revenue. So we actually adopted a more realistic but still a conservative approach, because the basis or the whole premise of our projection is on the estimated actuals. So we consider all of the actual amounts instead of just adding a certain percentage from the adopted budget. So if the adopted budget from last year is, let's say, 1 million, we didn't just put like, let's say, hey, we want to have like a 4% budget increase. But what we take into consideration is what our actuals in the past and what our estimated actuals would be for this fiscal year. And when we analyze each individual line items for the revenue categories, if we wanted to have like a certain percentage of growth, we wanted to average it, or we wanted to keep it the same. So that's the one thing that we wanted to emphasize when it comes to the budgeting methodology for revenues. So for fiscal year 23-24, our preliminary revenue, what we are proposing as of now is 75 million, which is a 7.8 increase, 7.8 increase from prior year's budget. It may look as if it's like a huge increase from our amended budget versus what our proposed budget would be. But if you take a look at the estimated actuals for this year, we're actually about like 5 million less, basically. So
5 million less than what?
5 million less than what the estimated actuals would be for this year. So it's an increase in the adopted budget from the prior year. But if you take a look at like a comparison between what would be this year's estimated actual revenue versus what would be our adopted budget revenue, there's actually a decrease on that, because we are still expecting a little growth when it comes to property taxes, but we want it to be conservative as well. And that's for the revenue for the general fund. For the expenditure side, we also implemented a new methodology. We actually used a zero-based budgeting methodology and projecting our expenses, meaning we actually start from scratch instead of taking the prior year, put a certain percentage increase or decrease. And the review process is very detailed, because we actually took a look at each of the line items and make sure they are all justified, whether or not it's higher or lower than previous year's budget. We actually take into consideration, what would be our actuals or our estimated really expenditure for the next fiscal year. So for the preliminary expenditure for the general fund, it's actually budgeted or projected at 68.9 million, which is a 6.6 million decrease from last year's budget. And then this is
What page are you on, please?
sorry, Greg. I'm still on page 3, so I'm really just talking about the overall, budget, like a high level budget for the general fund. So it's page 3 of the report, page 69 of the full packet.
No, I don't.
So what's 60.9 million that you're referring to?
68.9 million, Director. It's on the second gray line on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth column,
Second total down.
second total, and then the
Okay.
68.9 million. So that's the preliminary budget for the expenditure. As you know, we mentioned earlier, there could be changes with this. But as of now, based on the information that we've gathered, we're proposing or we're projecting a 68.9 million budget for expenditures, and that's again a 6.6 million decrease from last year, which is equivalent to 8.7% in percentage.
Question, before my brain gets too overloaded here. So you mentioned a percentage, it's about 50% less than what it was this year or last year.
8.7%.
The budget, right?
Yes, correct.
So the thought process that went into that decrease, was it based upon the actual that maybe coming through, or the budgets that the staffing put together?
That is correct, Director Jones. So basically, overall, we actually forecasted or we actually projected what we're going to spend in the next fiscal year based on the information that we have. So we did not just, hey, this is our budget from last year. Let's just add up like, a 2% increase or a 2% decrease based on, let's say CPI index or what, or, any other percentage basically. So it's really based on the needs for the next fiscal year. It's whether or not, again, it's higher or lower, than the current, or than the previous year.
Well, the other question is, how did, comparing that number with the actual projected actual for this year, what's the variance that as you see it might take place in between what you're saying you want to budget for next year versus the projected actual that I guess you don't really know until
so for
they come in, but you have some idea where that number?
So as of now, based on the information we have for the estimated actual for the expenditures, we actually have 65.4. We're projecting 65.4 million actuals for the expenditures.
Column immediately preceding. Next column to the left.
Yes, the column to the left of the preliminary budget. So
65.409.
Yeah, 65.409. So we're kind of like expecting a 3.4 million or 3.5 million increase in the expenditures, basically, if this projection is gonna be the actuals.
So the I guess the projected budget was 75.
Mm-hmm.
So the real question for me is, and it's going to 10 million almost less, is that because we decided to help out and not spend that extra dollar on food costs or something like that? Or?
No, it's really just based on what we really need. So we're not really cutting down the cost per se. It's more of, hey, this is really what we're projecting that we're gonna need. So so that's the kind of like the basis of our budget for the next year.
There was also wasn't there 7 million of revenue that is coming in above what was budgeted on the revenue side?
Yeah, on the revenue side, yes, that's correct.
So you've got dials going both directions. On it, expenses down a little bit, revenues higher. Yeah.
And I guess I'm really kind of wondering that little excess that's projected, may that come in where they make soft land to.
Where's that going to?
Elaine, did we also have the 6 new ladder truck included in other operating up there, or is that coming out somewhere else?
So that can get all expense this year, chief. So that, you know, new engines that we have, it's already part of the estimated actions.
So big expense in this current fiscal year that we don't have repeating in the next year also. That's part of the reason why our expenditures have dropped.
That would almost be dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
And drop
Yeah.
pretty close.
That's a lot of it, along with that same philosophy as Elaine has been talking about. We went through all the programs, that zero-based budgeting concept, right? So we weren't just taking prior years and adding a little bit to it. We're actually trying to be pretty pragmatic and look at what the actual needs were. So you'll see our revenues increasing. We had some constructive feedback last year that our revenues were always too conservative, so they're a little less conservative this year. And I think our expenditures are a little bit more conservative.
It's better to be real than. Oh, yeah. That high projection.
Yeah.
So it's
They're getting a little bit more real.
Yeah, I was gonna bring this up when you were done, but we're having this conversation where we're saying, the budget is down. What would you say, 8% or something like that? And then we're saying it's up certain percent. The reality is, this is a budget increase. We need to speak plainly. We're expecting to spend this year $65.4 million. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And the new budget says we're gonna spend $68.9 million. That's more money.
Mhm.
There's no cutting here. Now, if we make the reference point, the current year's bloated budget, which a year ago we said this budget's terrible, it doesn't make sense, but next year we'll have a good budget. We shouldn't be using as a reference point the budget. We should be using as a reference point the actual. And I think it's appropriate to say our expenses are going up. It's $3.5 million, which is about 5.5% or 5.4% or something like that. I think we just ought to speak plain English, but this is not a budget cut, it's a budget increase. And I think Robert's pointing out an important point here. It's hard to understand this when we use one vocabulary and said, oh, the budget's getting lower. No, it's not, it's getting higher.
I guess it's a matter of, you know, what we're comparing with. We can also put like a language on that when we're basing it off the estimated actuals. But I think historically, or I think, you know, from what I've seen also with other agencies, we're also basing, you know, the comparison, not just with the estimated actuals, but also with the budget as well. So, I mean, we can do that as well. I mean, if that's, you know, what we wanted to do.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. And that's one of the things that concerns me is I agree with you. I think this is the way other agencies do it, but they do it for a purpose. They do it to make themselves look better. They do it to hide revenue from their unions. They do it for a whole bunch of reasons. But it doesn't help the board make good decisions, and it doesn't help the public understand what's going on. I mean, you can compare it to the budget if you want, but we definitely have to compare it to what our actual will be this year. I just think that's essential for honest, transparent communication.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it and understand that. I mean, it's, you know, when we create a budget and, you know, expenditures budget, we're trying to make reasonable estimations, trying to make sure we don't have to come back to the board for additional appropriation. So there's always going to be some cushion in there. I would imagine that our actuals, you know, when we're looking at the end of 23-24, are probably going to be lower than our budgeted amounts. We've historically always over budgeted on expenditures. So I mean, our reference point is to look at the prior year's budget, understand that's what's in there is, I don't know, $7 million in apparatus that we pull out of there. And then we're, you know, we're about even then if we remove that with a prior year's budgeted amount, taking into consideration increasing costs. So yes, it's not super user friendly in comparing all the different roads, but
you know, I still think we need to look at what our actual is. And I think, by the way, it's also, you brought up the idea of $7 million in capital expense. capital expense should not be in this. I know that we have a policy for some reason that doesn't make sense to me to run all our payments through the general fund. But it gives you these $7 million swings in departments. It's not real. It's not like, oh, we're saving 7 million this year. We're not saving 7 million. We just didn't buy those fire engines again. And anyway, I think this should not include capital expenditures because it mucks up the thing. It makes our expenditures last year look $7 million higher.
I completely appreciate that. And it was done differently in my last organization. You know, I don't know what restricts us from doing that. We'll work on making it more transparent.
Okay, thank you. And one more thing, just while we're talking about that, for comparability's sake, I think it would be good if you could adjust when you transfer people from one department to another department, and there's a $500,000 swing in the budget because of that transfer, it makes it look like, oh, they're $500,000 higher, and the other one's $500,000 lower. It seems to me we could adjust the prior budget so that we can deal with apples to apples. That could be done with a footnote. That could be done with a footnote or something, but it just helps us compare.
I agree too. When you see those things move into district administration, for example, you're like, whoa, look at how much cost on it, but we just moved body from another budget or program. I agree.
Any other comments?
One last point of clarification. On their, I'm still looking on page 69.
Okay.
Where you said other operating costs, I noticed that the number other operating, the number went down. Can you kind of help me out a little bit, understanding what the vague term other operating?
So other operating costs for expenditure, those are actually this supplies, fixed assets. So if you go to page,
Where's it? All right, I think fine, so.
Isn't that $7 million difference, the fire engine? Between this year's budget and next year's budget, it's in $7 million, the fire engine?
I'm just looking at for the actual, where it composed of.
yeah, so I think Director Jones is pertaining to what are the basically the things under other operating. So those are, so if you take a look at page 13 on the graph, 13 on the chart, I mean. So those are the materials and supplies. So this is more on a granular level. So this is more overview, like the one on page 3. So materials and supplies, contract services, and fixed assets.
On page 3.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the other operating would consist of the materials and supplies, contract services, fixed assets, and this time around the contingency reserve as well. So those would, compose the other operating expenditure.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I'll have one later.
Well, we're gonna do, I guess we're gonna make a motion to accept the report as presented.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you just begun his presentation.
Oh, Elaine, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so I was
Yes.
yeah, so just going back to page 3 again. So so we're gonna talk about the reserve, which is the other source of funds for the next fiscal year. So this 230,000, this actually pertains to the thermal imaging cameras that we already purchased, but we're not expected to actually receive it within this fiscal year. So it's a prepaid asset. So it's actually on the prepaid asset reserve as of now. That's why in the next fiscal year, when we're gonna expect that to be delivered, we're gonna use that reserve to actually recognize the expense. So that's the 230,000 there. And then the difference basically between the sources, which is the revenue, and then the general fund reserve versus the uses of the expenditure would be the balancing, basically this is the balancing figure for, in order for us to have like a balanced budget for the next fiscal year, is the transfer out of like 6.3 million, which we're gonna transfer to the CIP fund. The CIP, the 6.2, yeah. So that's the overview for, the general fund. And then, the rest of the pages are really just, more details like on a granular level and, the analysis on, the budget. So if you go on page 19, actually page 20. Page 20 of the report and overall page 86 of the packet. So this is now for the capital improvements project fund. So basically we are really just an overview, we're really just carrying over the estimated remaining budget that we have from the approved projects that we have right now. So that's the second table for on page 20. So we're carrying over like 3.1 million from the existing projects that we have right now. And then the second table really is a new request for next fiscal year, which amounts to 350,000.
Any questions or comments?
No, I'm surprised that we're only expecting to spend $350,000 next year on capital improvement stuff.
Oh, we're expecting to actually spend a 3.5 million. So 3.1 million.
Some of it's already committed.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
The new projects?
The new projects.
That's why the committee, the finance committee is working with them on the forecast for capital improvements, because we have other capital improvement projects that haven't been approved and formalized that add up to millions and millions of dollars that we don't really have visibility into. So we're trying to, the committee's been working with staff is to try to get that forecasted view of what's our kind of unfilled demand for capital projects,
Right.
that we and get ballpark numbers on those things, just so we have some idea of
I've
what
been
the
asking,
future looks like.
I've been asking for that for 10 years. We need a capital budget
Yeah, we're
going,
getting close.
You can have it in May.
In May.
Ooh, I just promised that out loud, but yes. So we're gonna have a draft of the finance committee in May. We've already started work on it, of identifying all of our significant assets that we have that we will need to replace, even if they're new. Right, so that we can create a sinking fund. So even Station 4, brand new, right, that we paid cash for, every year, if it's a 50-year or 75-year building, we need to set aside something for future replacement. So
so
that's
we're looking at something that would total 75 to $100 million.
it's gonna be well over that.
Okay.
It'll probably be 250.
Okay, but I'm agreeing, it's not gonna be $250,000.
No, and it's, yeah, I mean,
I think the ballpark we were talking about was 200 to 250.
yeah, and what it will do is, as we place money aside for CIP every year, and whatever, it will show the board and our community and our cities that we're not just socking this away without a purpose, that it actually has a purpose, and we're not even close to fully funding, the total capital replacement fund.
Can we look into paying for those capital items directly out of the capital fund rather than having it funnel through the operating budget and therefore mucking up all those numbers?
Maybe. Right, well, we'll talk, we'll talk some more, but yes, I appreciate the ability to just look at operating costs above the line and kind of your capital projects below the line, so you can see what your cost of doing business every year is versus, I get it, how it kind of skews things.
And we're not putting in some kind of a public sector version of depreciation basically for these assets, which is what you call the sinking fund or whatever.
It's and conceptually, that's what it is, right? Yeah.
It's depreciation. And that should be an expense in the operating budget.
Yeah, what it is, instead of depreciating an existing asset, it's forecasting what a future asset is gonna cost, right? So construction costs looking forward, so that when the time comes to replace it, there's sufficient money there for, for example, if we depreciated Station 3, whatever the cost is, $2 million does not reflect what the replacement cost is.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's correct conceptually, because I don't think you should capitalize in inflation. But I think you want to do it at a constant dollar value, so you should.
But we can have lots of interesting discussions on that. Really what we're trying to do is make sure we're prepared for the future. We can show the community that what we're setting aside is reasonable.
The major step one is what's all the unfunded projects that are on the horizon.
Yeah.
That could happen even in the next decade.
Or if we were gonna fund it today, what would it cost?
What would they cost? And, you know, it's kind of in a way, in the financials as a whole, because of that capital, there's kind of, there is an appearance that the revenues are really high and excess revenues, but then there's this massive liability of the capital improvements that's not offsetting it. So you don't get a real view of what the financial picture is over the coming years until you start putting in the physical capital improvement projects that are pending out there.
Well, that's exactly the right approach. I couldn't agree more. I mean, in the past, what we've done though, to hide the money from the public is to say, oh, our revenues are going to be low and our expenses are going to be high. And then each year we're surprised by, oh, look at all the revenue we got, and we saved all this money. And that was the game we played. But that's a bad game. We ought to be realistic. We ought to say, we need that money right now to be buying these new stations and so forth.
Yes, we heard you last year, and that's why Elaine has developed a new philosophy this year that's much more accurate than it has been in prior years.
Thank you.
Sure.
So lastly, just so for the special revenue fund, so that's on page 22 or page 88 of the packet. 88 of the packet. So this is really the budget for the cooperative agreements that we have existing right now for the task force. So basically what the methodology here is, since it's a cost reimbursement grant, so what your revenue is would be technically your expenditures. So what we are projecting as a preliminary budget for the next fiscal year is 1.4 million. So again, this includes the estimated amounts that we are gonna carry over from the current or the existing, cooperative agreements that we have, which is 2020, 2021, and 2022 cooperative agreements. So those are the amounts of the estimated carryover, and that's what we're gonna budget next year. But take note that since we're probably gonna receive another cooperative agreement this coming fiscal year, so that's still not included here. So that's gonna get added once we do the analysis in September, October. So this budget is not final, but this is more of the budget that we currently have for the current agreements. So that's the overall overview.
Yeah, please.
Let me make sure I'm understanding. We obviously don't know what's going to happen in terms of disasters and getting those revenues and what the expenses are, but does the revenue equal the expense exactly? In other words, for all these expenses that you're putting in, are you putting in an equivalent revenue so they all balance to zero?
Correct. So this is a little different from the regular deployments or regular like FEMA claims that we have, because this is already set. So every year we get, let's say, 1.2 million funding from FEMA. We have a cooperative agreement with them. So that's the grant amount. So the grant amount technically is, that's basically your source and use of funds. So your revenues and expenditures would almost always equal to, to the grant amount basically. So expenditures and revenues are the same.
And do we have to include those funds in our general fund, or could we segregate that too? Because again, that's just a lot of background noise.
This is actually segregated. So this is not on the general fund.
Okay.
So this is on the special revenue fund.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a completely different fund, basically. And we are tracking it on a completely separate fund.
Okay.
So that's actually the overall, budget for, the preliminary ones, basically. So we are actually now open for any questions, comments.
Before you I wanted to point out one thing on the next on page it's 91 there. Anyway, the FTEs, that is the one item that is likely going to change right now. We're neutral. We have not added any positions, but we're in the process out at the vehicle maintenance unit or shop, we're basically trying to make some corrections. We've had some part-time employees out there that don't show up as an FTE, so in order to avoid some problems with labor, we're eliminating those positions and looking at, we know we need to add a body out there, whether it's a mechanic or some higher level position. We're not sure yet, but that's the one anticipated change there. And then the other one that I had already discussed was adding some costs probably into the district administration budget for just the dispatch services compensation. But I think right now we're getting significant changes there. Anyway, back to the board for any questions.
Sure.
I would just ask about the FTE for a moment. The FTE used to be the only way the board kind of managed the budget, and I think it's too limited. The board needs to do a broader job. But I wanted to ask specifically about the captains here. Is it correct that every piece of apparatus has a captain? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, right. I don't recall, and I don't know if this is an issue, I don't know even what our policy is. I don't recall increasing our captains from 27 to 30 as an explicit resolution of the board or anything like that. Maybe it was implicit when we approved the purchase of an extra, ladder truck or the second ladder truck or something. But I'm just mentioning that because I think I would have, I remember when the battalion chiefs came up and went from 3 to 6. I remember a number of these things, but I don't ever remember captains being discussed.
The addition of 3 positions happened during my tenure. We discussed it at the board. It was related to the squad. We had temporary captain staffing on there. We made them permanent. Right. So that's what, in essence, it had always been an acting captain and a paramedic. And what we did was made the staffing or the leadership and supervision permanent there. So that was discussed at the board. But
it was, but I don't believe the board approved the head count change, and I don't know if the board is.
It was, I don't know if it was done in the budget process or if it was done separately. I'll go back and pull the staff report. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, I don't remember in which manner we did it, but I know it was with board approval.
Okay, I'd love to be wrong. That's fine.
Yeah, I would love for you to be wrong.
Under captain, I don't see a staff captain position. Is that separate or?
It is separate, right? Underneath captain, you see the training captain.
Oh, so that is.
That's staff.
That's the staff.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sure.
I think about, I meant to ask about it at another meeting, but 2 questions about staff captain. Is there any reason that it has to be called captain? I mean, could it be called training officer or something else so that there wasn't 2 types of captains?
I would imagine we could. I think just as we look across other agencies, that's just normal to call them a staff captain or a training captain versus a training officer. But
and the other point I was going to make is this always seemed like an important position. There's no question. It was really a critical position for it. I always wondered why it reported to a division chief who knew nothing about training. Didn't seem to make sense.
no. Well, in this case, our division chief, Todd Ellis, knows everything about training. He used to be, I think,
He was the staff captain.
Yeah.
And he reported to somebody I think who didn't know
Right.
about it, right?
But it's just, it's our organizational structure right now. You may occasionally have somebody in those positions that hasn't had the position before, and may not be the perfect fit, but that happens in organizations sometimes where you supervise people whose job you've never performed before. So it's definitely an imperfect world there. But right now, it's pretty good with Chief Ellis in there.
It's my understanding that when you say captain in training, is that person in training to become a captain? Is that perfect for that?
No, he's actually assigned to the training division on a 40-hour work week. He helps run our academies, does our rookie training, develops programs for us. That's like an extra body in there to help us with the workload.
Can we put labeling, I guess, where he is it?
Can you remind us of what that is?
Right now, it's Captain Kelly. it was Captain Souza.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, Elaine's taking questions now, so if you have questions that pertain to the whole budget, this is the time.
I have quite a few.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll do one or two or three maybe, and then you put me off.
So if I can just weigh in, Director Bernstein, because if you have questions or concerns about the budget, we don't want to limit them. Maybe there's a couple tonight. You can also refer them to the Finance Committee or to us, and we can answer them and bring them back at the May meeting too. However you want to do it. We don't want to eliminate your ability to voice concerns over the budget.
And just to be clear, just if it's not clear, you're not adopting the preliminary budget tonight. This is not your only chance to make these comments. There will be preliminary budget, a public hearing, a further meeting before you actually adopt the budget.
Right, but when it comes back next time, we're gonna publish that, and my goal was to perhaps change some of the things we got here before we publish it.
It sounds like you want to
It will
give
take-
input now. so that-
Exactly, but it won't take a huge amount of time.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me go. Is it easier to refer to the page of the report or the page of our packet?
Any would do, I think, yeah.
The packet, page 71 of the packet, the general fund revenue budget. My comments in several places, but the ERAP rebate, there's a discussion elsewhere where we made up this rule of, oh, let's just take half of it and put it in there.
Mhm.
I don't think, let's put the whole thing in there. We know we're gonna get it. We've been getting it every year, and there's every reason to believe we're gonna get it. And I don't think it's conservative budgeting, putting half of it in there, because if that were going to change, the county would have had to change what it was doing before this. In other words, the county's already budgeting a year after this right now. So the budget, the county's way ahead of you. It's not, this is what we're gonna get for the next year. It's not gonna be exact, I don't mean that, but it's gonna be very close. So I think we're under reporting 3.5 million of revenue right there. So that was one comment. Then as just a general comment, in table 3 here, if you look at the third column, the adopted budget, you see how this is rounded off to the nearest $100, and it's clear that it's a budget because you just look at it and you can see that these were rounded numbers. They have to be a budget, right? But when you look at the last column, the proposed budget, I mean, these are down to the $1. And I would like to see you round it off to the 100 or 1,000 or even 10,000, because it just makes it clear that it's a budget. It'll save you time and proofreading and all kinds of stuff if you do that. I want to ask about, under other revenue, the use of money and property. This year, we're going to have more cash than we've had before.
Yes.
Okay, this year, the rates being paid by LAIF are higher than they've been in the past.
Correct.
So it doesn't make sense to me that the amount of money we're going to get is going to be substantially lower for this.
So for this one, I would just like to say that again, this is, part of the conservative approach that, we're trying to actually implement. But at the same time, let's say for the LAIF amount, even though there's this interest that we're going to get, like, I'm still assuming, let's say 2% with our, current LAIF amount, let's say 60 million. So that's already like $1.2 million like revenue. But I'm also taking into account the potential fair value adjustment for, the LAIF account. I don't know if you remember this. I think for last fiscal year, we actually had to book some kind of like a fair value loss of 900,000 for our LAIF amount. So I'm also considering that, in the budget for the next year, because, for higher interest rates, basically your fair value goes lower. So I also take into consideration that amount. That's why you see, it's only like a $532,000, like, like budget for that specific category.
Well, that seems reasonable. That wasn't in the narrative, but that, what you just said seems reasonable. It just didn't say that, so that's a good point. Let me ask you about page 73 of the packet. And when the pumpkin at the top.
Pie chart.
Pumpkin pie. I don't understand the interplay of the, underneath the chart, table 4. There's a narrative here and I can't quite make sense of what it says here. It says, first of all, that the tax growth is 4.7%. And then that came from the County of San Mateo. And then the growth rate includes the inflation factor of 1.02. Does that mean that it's 4.7 plus 102 or?
No, it's inclusive of the it's the 1.7% is inclusive in the 4.07, so it's included.
So that is,
Where did the 1.02% come from? Is that something?
It's also something from, it's also the amount or the factor that was given to us by the county as well.
I see. So, okay. Okay, so the 4.7% is what the county told us.
Correct.
Okay.
It's inclusive of the 1.02%. 1.02 factor, I mean.
Yes, but it didn't seem like the property tax went up by 4.7%.
Yeah, so again, that's the estimated growth. But as part of our conservatism, we only actually put like 1% increase on the estimated actuals for secured property tax.
Okay, so that's what I was going to put together on the next page. The very next page says, we demonstrate prudent staff proposes a growth rate of 1%. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so again, we know how much we're going to get next year. I don't think you're demonstrating prudence. I think you're just kind of demonstrating denial here. I mean, we know what it's going to be. We should put it in the real numbers.
The 4.7%, just so everyone knows, or maybe you're aware. So 4.7% is based on the assessment roll tracker. So although it's a good indicator of what we're going to receive, but it's not a 1:1 when it comes to the property tax receipts. So even though the county is saying, hey, the assessment roll, the growth rate roll is 4.07%, that doesn't mean that we're going to get like 4.7% actual increase in the property tax receipts. That's just the growth of the assessment.
I would advise using it. The difference, I mean, we've got a $10 million pot of fluff here that this is not going to break it if we're slightly off here. So I just don't think it's prudence. I just think it's understating the revenues. So anyway, that's my comment on that. Okay.
One clarification.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Robert.
So my assumption is that historically we have gotten a certain percentage increase every year, and actually the actual that actually come through is somewhere, I assume close to that number or maybe a little bit higher.
That's correct. So just based on, I think I have some numbers here from the prior 2 years.
There's a chart on page 73 that.
Yes, so just in terms of the secured property tax, I think you're correct, Director Johnson, saying that we have we're close, if not higher, than what is estimated, estimated amount or assessment roll growth amount that was provided by the county. So for fiscal year 21-22, the actual growth rate is actually 7.6%. But this is not on the report because it's our prior years, but I just have the information here. But the assessment, based on the assessment roll tracker, the growth for the assessment is actually 6.6%. So we're kind of off by 1%. For fiscal year 22-23, we're also a little bit close. 8.6% is the projected actual growth. But the county's estimated, assessment roll growth is 8.19%, which is a 0.5%, difference or delta. So we're close to that. So it's really a good indication of what we're going to receive. But then at the end of the day, it's really not the actual amount.
So the 4.7 is the approximation
That we receive from the county, correct?
right, and so the other 1%, you included this inflationary factor of 0.02%.
1.0.
Yeah, 1.02% on top of the 4%.
No, it's not.
It's
It's
inclusive.
included, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I go on? Oh, just a general comment on page 77 of the packet. Some of these, there's kind of an imbalance in terms of the importance of some of these items. So in a way, you kind of just, on an assumption, you threw away $3.5 million, and which I don't agree with, but it's a huge amount of money. But then you give a fair amount of space, and you obviously spent time. I'm looking at numbers or letter C here, current service charge, where we're talking about like $10,000 and so forth. Some of these are so minimal. I wish you wouldn't spend the time or even my reading time to deal with things that are that small. And somehow lump them together or something.
So for that, Director, so because basically for this one, I didn't really take that much time actually in gathering this because these are all contracts. So we already have them in place. So we're really just putting the numbers there basically.
Okay. Let me look at table 7 on page 78 here. Somehow, and I don't quite see why this is happening, because I didn't go through all the numbers, but I'm looking at table 7 here. And the third numbers column is our estimated actual for this year, where we're looking at spending about 32.3 million on salaries and benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And our budget was for 35.3 million, so we're about 3 million under budget here. And yet our preliminary budget is going to go up to 36.3. It just seems to me that we're putting a lot of fluff in there. I hate to see that.
A part of this basically is that's why you're only seeing like 32.3 million on the estimated actual is we actually budgeted the vacancies. So those are actually not, most of them, or if not all, are actually not filled within the fiscal year. So there's some gap between what we budgeted for the vacancies on whether budget savings basically due to vacancies. So that's the primary reason why we only have like 32.3 million.
But I think a budget should be as accurate as possible. I don't think we should budget for vacancies. And the fact is, we've got vacancies right now, right? I mean, there's positions that won't be filled by the time this new budget starts. So I just don't think you should. What we're doing is we're authorizing this as an expenditure, even though we know we won't spend it. Why would we authorize an expenditure that we know we're not going to spend? I think it's just padding, it's fluff. I know everybody does it. I know all the cities do it, but it's what I personally hate about the public sector. I know some private companies do it too. Everybody tries to do it, but it's not good management.
I actually would tend to disagree with you on that one. I think it is good management if you have approved FTEs. You should make the assumption that you're going to fill those positions and budget according to your fully allocated headcount.
If you think they're going to do it, right?
Well, again, I believe they are doing it. They're filling positions rapidly and interviewing and filling them.
But we know some of these positions won't be filled now.
I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't know which positions, we are actively recruiting, obviously, for quite a few positions. I'm not aware of there could be 1 or 2 positions in there that we don't necessarily have short-term plans for, but in general, we're moving forward to filling our allocated positions. Right.
Okay, I'm talking about my philosophy is to have a budget that's realistic, not that's padded.
Yeah.
And what we've done is we've authorized the chief to spend up to the budget. I just don't think it's good.
Sure. And our challenge is, I mean, these are, like you have already identified, most local governments budget this way. It's our best practice. We generally follow those. I agree individually, I wouldn't budget that way personally for my own business or for my own household, but that's the way governmental budgeting tends to happen. So the same thing is true, I think, with the ERAF rebate. I think our experience has been that nobody fully budgets for the ERAF rebate. So we recognize that causes us to under budget revenues. Common best practice across local governments. I mean, what we would look for is direction from the board. If you want us to change that, we can change it. The impact it has on our budget is revenues will be a little bit more accurate, but the number that gets contributed to CIP either at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year when we close out, it's all going to be the same number. It will just be different timing wise. So whatever the direction of the board is, we're happy.
We did get board consensus about 5 years ago to not budget for stuff we knew we weren't going to spend. But
Yeah.
I'm not gonna.
And again,
I don't think that's the same as this.
we are certainly more aggressive in our revenue budgeting this year than we were last year. I mean, we're not 100%, and our expectation is that revenues will come in above budget, as they always do.
Let me point out another sore point here on page 78 here, the same chart, table 7. If you look at our estimated actual, I was just pointing out the salaries and benefits, 32.3 million. And the overtime we're expecting is just 0.6 million this year, which is 18.7% of payroll is over. I mean, we have overtime in the amount of 18% of salaries. The prelim, what?
I want to make sure the chief's on the same page. Yeah, page 78.
The third column, numbers column. Right next to that, under preliminary budget, we're budgeting for 36 million. And we're going to 8.4 million in overtime, which is 23%. I don't understand why our revenue, why our overtime is going up as a percentage of salaries. That to me is wrong. We're filling positions with, and 23%, I just think it's too high. I'd like to see that number down around 2 or 3 million. So anyway, that's just something that's bothering me. We're basically saying that overhead is going to be more part of our budget next year than it is this year. So I knew we were tightening up, we were getting better procedures, and overtime was going to be less. That's what the budget shows. I've got a couple more and then I'm done.
Does anyone else have comments? I think we're just all in the chat.
Well, a lot of the things that Robert, I probably would have done, we did in finance committee, so we aren't replaying all of that.
So we haven't gone over task force 3 yet.
Yeah. I'll wait all this part here.
It's reassuring that there were perhaps at least three people who are going in the same direction. Okay. Can you explain on page 80? It does discuss overtime, but I want to refer to the retirement thing here. I don't understand why our retirement costs are going up like this. Can you just tell me why that's happening?
So basically, this is really just based on the valuation report that, the CalPERS provides to us. So I think everyone is aware that, if past year, at least, we've actually wiped all the gains that we've had in 2020. So this is part of the reason why, the costs are increasing, because they actually had such huge losses on the investment plan assets. So that's why they need to recuperate that by increasing, our retirement contribution rates, basically. So that's like a huge part of it. So.
One of the things that we have done in the past, which I don't believe we have provided for this year, is an additional payment to CalPERS. It's something that I know the past board has been really interested in doing, is paying, and it's been substantial, 5 million, 6 million, 8 million. I mean, a lot of extra money that we put in there. I'm not talking about the statutory addition in the past. I'm talking about us voluntarily putting more money in. We haven't done that, and we haven't done it in this budget as far as I can see either.
Yeah, we're gonna bring that one up in the June meeting. So we're gonna have to present like, like a report, like what the board would want to actually do with that budgeted amount. So I think we budgeted like around 3.1 billion this fiscal year. So we're gonna have to ask for, your direction, whether we would actually want that we would actually want to pay, the unfunded liability again, or we would actually keep it in the other reserves. So that's gonna be part that's gonna be part of a staff report in another meeting.
It's one of the reasons why finance committee is pushing the capital improvement report and forecast, is so that when the board gets to that decision point, you can ask yourself, is the best use of excess funds to roll over and pay down the unfunded liabilities associated with retirements, or are we better off parking the money and investing in around capital improvement and or potentially deferring making that adjustment now that interest rates and returns are up?
Okay. Director, I don't know if you recall, but last year I asked if the board would pause on that practice so that we would have time to, because I what Director Bloom was talking about. Once we pay it into the CalPERS, it's gone to the black hole for forever. And especially with some plans that we have for some capital improvement projects, what we're hoping for is some time to share with you which is the best, and we're going to use some professional help also. What's the value of $10 million going into the UAL versus CIP versus issuing bonds versus the whole big scheme of things. So, but once we send it, it's gone forever. So
No, I understand, but Amelia, I agree with what you're talking about here, but it also affects the rate then that we pay CalPERS.
it absolutely does.
That's why we keep paying it down.
Right, so that's hard to know. Yeah, it's hard to know what rate to use here without knowing that, so.
We'll dial.
If you're picking
I mean, there's definitely, and because I'm one of the proponents of continuously paying down the UAL, but I mean, I've been kind of thinking things through a little bit, probably in the last 6 months or so that, maybe it's, I mean, to pay some down, but not, I don't know how often we need to do it, because you're right, once it's been paid, it's gone, and other agencies aren't doing that all the time, and so I don't know. It's
the other thing that's changed is interest rates are materially higher.
Higher now.
So if you're going to park your money and get 4 or 5% interest in the short term, it raises the question: am I better off making that contribution according to some arbitrary calendar of making contributions, or am I better off holding it? And then say, well, I'm gonna wait to make the contributions when we hit the next round of low interest rates.
Yeah.
And we can't get a return on our
I mean,
money.
probably a
But
little.
there's a lot of dials going on in there to make those financial calculations. And I think, just from my look backwards at that practice, it probably made a lot of sense when interest rates were very low.
Yeah.
And holding that money was essentially that you were losing money by holding the money, essentially.
Right.
And so it probably made sense to pay it off, but with the changing interest rate environment, I'm not sure that the numbers will calculate out the same way.
I think that's right, Gary, because we've been operating under a very different financial scenario, like conditions.
Well, rate was paying less than 0.2%, so at that point, there was nothing there.
Paying 1.2% and booking losses.
Worse, yeah.
Yeah, worse than that.
Yeah.
Where now you can go into things like treasury bills and other things, 4+%, 5% in the short term ones right now, and have no principal risk whatsoever.
Well, I have one last question, but let me just, while you mention that, when are we gonna have a financial advisor on board?
So we're gonna actually put a staff report in the next finance committee meeting. So that's gonna be in May. And then the recommendation to actually execute the contract would also be in the May board meeting. So once that is, if the board approves it, then as soon as, we execute the contract, we're gonna have the contract ready by the board meeting. So May 16, May 17, we're gonna probably execute the contract. So they're gonna probably start, doing the work the end of May, start of June.
and this might sound like a stupid question, but is there any work to do here? Isn't it something the guy would just know? I mean, we're not a unique agency, we got so much money and so forth, wouldn't they know what makes sense at this point?
And then just have a contract.
No, I didn't mean that.
No, there's actually work he's gotta do relative to the cash consumption and cash needs of the district to know which part, and then there's also the staff's gonna have to work with them to decide the bifurcation between what we leave in late, what we leave in short-term accounts, what we invest in either short range to long term. And so you have to pick, there is a lot of work to go as to where on the yield curve we want to invest that money. And that yield curve dynamics is changing by the day. It went completely with the Silicon Valley Bank failure. It kind of went upside down for a while. And now the rates have again recovered from the shock of that bank failure. Yeah, and so it's not a fixed thing where you can look at it, there's the answer the day that they sign the contract.
But I mean, the easy part is if we're throwing off, expect to throw off $5 to $10 million a year in excess revenue, we're not talking about cash needs particularly. Right?
Well, it's tied to those. I don't want it to pull investment strategy here, but it is tied to some of these decisions about how you invest that money is different if you're going to pay it at the end of the year to CalPERS,
right?
Than if you're going to hold it beyond the end of the year.
Okay.
And they have to get, our investment advisors will have to get in sync with the staff around all those dials and dynamics and know what to invest where and where on the yield curve to invest.
I agree.
But if staff has a better answer,
That was great. And we're gonna come back to the board with some changes to the investment policy.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
But
So-
I forgot about that
Are
part.
y'all looking at that at the next finance committee?
No, Director, so in response to that, so basically, we're still gonna adopt an annual investment policy, which this is gonna be the next meeting, but I'm just gonna say it's gonna be status quo for now until we actually get onboarded with, the investment advisor. And then the first step really with, the discussion is really just taking a look at the investment policy. So that's really the first step. So we're expecting, once we onboarded the investment advisor, investment manager, we're probably gonna have recommendations for changes in the investment policy, probably around July timeframe.
Okay, I mean, it has to be reviewed annually anyway,
Correct.
so this is the right time to do it.
Yes, so basically, we already did the annual review, I think I can't remember, but it's October or May of last year as well. So this, again, you're right. So this is the annual review, but then just so you know, we're still gonna recommend status quo for now until we actually get the recommendations from the investment manager.
Is there any possibility that the person would be on board in June in enough time to make a recommendation about paying off CalPERS versus?
That's actually a different topic because the investment manager is actually more on, the investment side. Now I think what you're referring to is actually, you're probably looking into, a financial consultant, basically, which they don't do. So basically they really just manage the investment funds that we have. So the analysis between, let's say, we're better off with, paying off CalPERS, or we're better off with investing this. It's actually a different it's actually a different whole world, basically. So it's a separate one.
We would know what kind of return we expect by investing.
Right.
Correct.
They would be able to tell us what return we could get if they were to invest it.
And then staff can help analyze that so that we can make a decision, because in the end, the board's gonna have to make that decision, right? Based on the staff recommendation. So just finishing up on the investment policy, you're not really gonna do anything right away to it.
Yeah, right away. Yeah, until we actually
Right.
hire them. Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Okay, here's my last question. Sorry, on page 83 of the packet. In the it doesn't matter, second or third column, let's say the third column, which is the estimated actual. We've got the $7+ million of apparatus in there that we're purchasing this year. And in our preliminary budget for the new year, I'm not quite sure what, 1.9 million or something. It seems like that's a little bit different than what we were looking at before with the carryover money and the 351,000 of new money. Whatever. In any case, we're down to 1.9 million. So suddenly we're almost $6 billion that we're saving. And this is why I just want to stress that this makes it, you know, you look down here at the subtotal and we're saving 44.4%. And huge amounts of money and so forth. And it's just misleading because it's a capital item. And so to the extent we can purge that out of there, I think it helps us look at apples to apples.
Now, I'll chat offline and see, I don't know, you know, what the requirements are, but I agree that 1.9 million, I think, is for the ladder truck that we're taking delivery on. I think next
I
year.
think, Chief, that's related mostly to the SCBA.
Oh,
New
sorry, you're right.
What is that?
Yeah, that's right.
The new,
Self-contained breathing apparatus replacement.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. I appreciate his patience with me going through all this.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so is there a motion to accept the report as presented?
Elaine, I don't
We
think-
did, we are actually, okay, okay, thank you, Elaine. Thank you.
Okay.
Moving on to item 7, which is to discuss the diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI workflow plan completed in 2022 and prioritize the next step. So Francine and the chief.
I am gonna give this to Francine to chat about, and we can animate it as we see fit. But here, Francine,
okay, I'm on the wrong page, I'm sorry.
stand by.
Stand by.
We'll be with animate.
Okay. So, this report was a request from our Human Resources Committee meeting to bring back to the board the steps that the district or the staff has taken in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and steps that we plan to take. So some of the things that, so basically, just for summary, we started with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ad Hoc Committee that was chaired by Director Crawley and Director Jones. And that was started in January 2022, created, and we started meeting in February. We had 6 meetings before the committee was dissolved. Part of that committee, we did some work. The committee did on establishing the DEI framework, a purpose statement, some definitions, as well as some equity indicators to help guide staff and in their role. And what we did is we used some of those equity indicators, and the ones that we're going to focus on for this report is the areas where in policy, the hiring and recruitment representation, which is the district's outreach efforts, and the engagement and accessibility, which is events and trainings that we call internally for our staff. So in regards to policy, some of the things that we have completed is we basically are taking an applying an equity lens to all of the district policies and procedures. And in so doing, we are ensuring that they promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're removing gender-specific pronouns from policies, adding non-binary names or female names into MOUs where only male names existed, and replacing, and also we replaced the word citizen with community member throughout all of our policies. In addition to that, we created 2 new policies that are external facing for our community members. One is a civil rights policy, the other is a policy and notice of non-discrimination. And the purpose of this policy is just to let our community members know that the district does not discriminate in any of its programs or activity, and also allow an avenue for community members to file a complaint if they feel that they are being discriminated against or a program is not being offered equally to them. So those are 2 new policies that we've established for external facing. For hiring and recruitment, we are looking at all of our basically recruitment efforts. So that includes advertisement, job announcement language, and job descriptions to ensure that those are included. We are also looking the big one. We've done this with current recruitments that we have open, but we're also with our big one, which is the entry level firefighter position. We have modified the some of the requirements to ensure that we don't have any artificial barriers for entry for that classification. And we're also extending our outreach and kind of aligning our testing process with best practices, also to ensure that we have the greatest group kind of accessible to apply for that candidate. So some of the things that we're doing is that we, which is kind of standard for across agencies for public safety written examinations, is not necessarily ranking it, but using it as a pass-fail upon entry. And so once the candidate passes the written examination, then they would be eligible to move on to a video interview. We're also using video interviews, so candidates don't have to travel here. Maybe they're working and they can do the interview on their own time, and then we will be assessing those interviews and then bringing those candidates that rank high in for personal interviews. In addition to that, we also added, and it's actually not in this report, but we added preference points for military service, as well as those that have participated successfully in our cadet programs, to give a benefit to those that have shown interest in the district and to be on that process. In addition to that, we have so we, as I stated, we have kind of adjusted some of the minimum requirements. And even though we have adjusted these, we're still maintaining best practices, and the high standards are still being maintained for those that are interested in the recruit position. Some of the things that staff has done for representation for our employees, or actually, sorry, for representation for outreach. So we're reaching out to a lot of different medias to try and recruit eligible candidates for the district's positions. Some of those are print medias in different languages. We have the Tsingtao, EPA Today, the El Observador. So we are going to be posting our firefighter entry level position in all these medias, and we'll be able to track that to see what type of return we get on those, you know, kind of outreach efforts. We will also be posting in different CrossFit centers, and we will be establishing relationships with some colleges and sending our posting there. We actually are starting probably for about a month period. We'll be posting coming soon to kind of initiate interest. We will have a page on the district website that will be dedicated to this process, to kind of what the process entails, directing candidates to links that will be helpful for CPAT, for help on the written examination. We'll be posting a welcoming message from Steve Lorenzen, thanking people for their interest and kind of telling them about the process. And then we'll also be looking into posting a video kind of on the day of a life for a firefighter on our website as well. And it's exciting to put it on our new website, because our new website's really kind of a lot more accessible, user friendly. Yeah, it's clean, and so we're hoping to get a lot of traffic. Some of the other things that we've been doing internally for employees for engagement and accessibility. So the Human Resources coordinated a web-based training, and it was called Gateways to Inclusion, and it was Diversity Dialogue. This was a web-based training, but it was interactive, where it allowed employees to answer questions, kind of go through certain video scenarios. Out of 144 employees that were invited to attend, 135 have completed the training to date. We will be looking into offering future trainings to employees. For this one in particular, the chief provided a welcome message on Target Solutions, kind of reinforcing the importance of this training to employees. Some of the things we've been doing for accessibility is on our new website. We have an accessibility feature that if the user is disabled or impaired, they can click on the accessibility feature to find add-ons that will help them use and kind of get around the district's website. In addition, we now have the Google Translate on our website, which translates our current website into 15 languages just by the click of a button. Some engagement events that the district has held for employees is we have been doing a DEI calendar. We started it just kind of a month too short, but we started it instead of January, we began in February. We started with Black History Month. We've sent out emails to employees that have kind of celebrated Black firefighters. We also did International Women's Day, and we did the same for recognizing women's effort in firefighting. For the current month, it's actually Celebrate Diversity Month, and we're actually on Monday, we're going to be having an international potluck where we're inviting employees to bring an international dish of their heritage or one that they enjoy. We're inviting employees also to participate in the process to kind of give us feedback, let us know if they would like to, sponsor any events. And so each month we'll be doing this with employees to kind of reinforce the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion with the district. The fiscal impact for what we've done so far has been limited. A lot of it has been consumed with staff work. We did have one video, which was very nominal price to provide that, the web-based video that we bought. But if the district wanted us to engage in a consultant or provide a more robust program, we would come back with a estimated fiscal impact for that. But right now, just looking towards the board for direction and if there's any feedback as to where you would like us to go next, if equity indicators are the opportunity. Thank you. Robert, do you have anything as the chair of the regional committee?
There's a lot. I think when
So I actually have a quick question. This was a really good staff report, by the way, so really helpful. You mentioned giving kind of preference or points in the recruitment process to cadets. Are you applying all the same DEI recruitment efforts to the cadet program as you are to the firefighter program? Because otherwise you would be giving preference to somebody from a point perspective that doesn't meet your goal.
Yeah, we are, and actually the district is very fortunate to have a really diverse cadet pool, both in terms of ethnicity as well as gender, and so that's why we really wanted to kind of capitalize on the diverse cadets and give them kind of some preference. So the preference points, how that works is that it won't get them necessarily into the process. They have to pass, they have to qualify. And once they qualify, they pass the examination, then whatever they receive as a rank on the eligible list based on their oral exam, the preference points are added to that. So they have to meet the minimum qualifications. We're not giving them a benefit by letting them in if they weren't qualified, but it does give them a boost by adding 5 points to their.
If that's a diverse group, is there anything we can be doing to further develop that group so that they do better in the process? As they're coming out of their cadet program.
Well, just thinking about the program, they spend the better part of the year on our fire engines interacting. So I guess the answer would be yes, they are immersed in it and get to do just about all the things that we do. So that almost automatically will make them probably more successful, you know, having that exposure to the district and personnel and the rigors of the job and everything. So, yes, in that respect.
Have you ever considered like a buddy program or something where they have a assigned mentor?
I don't think we have. I don't know.
This idea, I mean, because it just strikes me, you know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot of all the things you could have been do. It just strikes me that if you have a very diverse cadet pool, and they are, as you said, and I've worked around cadets there in the past, where they're spending a phenomenal amount of their time with, you know, with the crews and on the engines and with the district in general. We just seemed a little extra investment into those cadets to get them to graduate into our firefighter positions would help our diversity goals.
Yeah, we are looking, and I've met with a couple of the firefighters that run the cadet programs. We are looking in ways to give them assistance, like through sponsorships, through, you know, the academies or things like that, where some of those programs are offered. And helping them even progress further.
Okay. It's just an area that I would just mention as an area for added focus to think about it, but this was terrific work by the committee and staff.
Great staff report. So you had mentioned Francine contacting the military, and how are you? Do they have like a training when they muster out or the military? Is there a way that we can get into the job fairs or something?
There is actually, yeah, I did receive an invitation to a job fair that focused on military. And so we are looking into like attending or being kind of a participant in to see again how we can pull candidates from.
Are we teaming up with other public safety agencies, like other fire agencies now? The police department, when they do maybe like the sheriff's office at the boot camp, where they work with trainees or potential trainees relative to that. Are we working with that partnership too?
That's another good idea. And there's also agencies, and I know Santa Clara is one. They do their physical agility on site at their training center, and they hold practice rounds for the physical agility. So maybe kind of reaching out to some local agencies where we can help candidates kind of prepare and practice for physical agility exams.
Great, I think you did a great job, and also thank the ad hoc committee to put it in the direction appropriately. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. The report was good, I agree. And I want to piggyback on Gary's comments about the cadet program. Because I've seen a huge improvement in what's happening. I go back when 10 years ago when I first got on the board and so forth. The cadet program wasn't very diverse. And more recently, I've just seen a huge difference in that. So I don't know what those people have done who've done that, but whatever they did the right thing. So if you could encourage that to continue to occur, it would be great. But even prior to that, I want to mention the Explorer program, because I think what Gary said about the Explorer program, about the cadet program, is also true of the Explorer program. That we ought to be doing whatever we can to get some of those high school kids involved doing stuff and so forth. And I haven't actually seen Explorers now for several years, 4 or 5 years. But when I last saw, I remember once seeing a girl, but I don't believe it was very diverse when I saw it. So whatever's been done at cadet level, I'd like to see it happen at the Explorer level too. I assume you're doing it formally. I mean, that's a scouting program, right? And that's what we're doing. I used to be involved as something in the Sea Scouts over here in River City and so forth. And there was a lot of interest at the high school level on doing some of those things, in their case with boats, obviously. Let me ask a question I have. I was just, you had statistics about 135 out of 144 employees completed the program. Can you, did you require this training of people?
We didn't make it required. We sent it out on Target Solutions with the chief's message and asking people, you know, to spend some time, and they did. I mean, there's been people that have been out on deployment and also workers' comp injuries. There's been a few above the 135 that started that haven't finished it yet, and we just send out reminders, please watch it.
And is that, you didn't require because you thought you'd get better response if you made it voluntary? Was that the idea?
Yeah, you know, I think it's kind of like baby steps, and we're just, you know, introducing and exposing employees and kind of, you know, reinforcing the importance, and we wanted employees to.
I mean, I don't like things when they're imposed either, but I just wondered what, and then I want to ask about the accessibility tools because of it on the internet.
Yeah.
What kind of, this just intrigued me, what kind of tools are available that make it more accessible on the internet?
So there's actually lots of tools, and some can increase the font size if you have vision impaired. Some are focused towards people with dyslexia. Some can actually read the text too if you're really vision impaired, but there's actually a lot of different add-ons that you can go to, and it will help with maybe whatever the impairment, the vision impairment would be.
So these are tools then that would make the website more accessible to the public so they know about the district.
Yes.
This is not for recruiting purposes.
No,
Okay.
I mean, well, if someone came to the website, sure, but yeah, it's just for anyone that comes to the district's website. We have an accessibility feature now, as well as the Google Translate.
Okay, and then I had a question on attachment A, which is the metric focus.
Yes, this is the one that Director Jones prepared as part of the ad hoc committee, and we wanted to kind of bring that back to the board to show that, you know, there's certain equity indicators that we've already begun to focus on, but there's others that will continue our work. But we're also looking to the board for, you know, direction on how we kind of proceed, if we keep going how we have been going, or if we want to feel more robust.
Well, this page kind of suggests two things. One is to be keeping some demographic data,
Yes.
and it also says to focus on equity. But I was just curious, for example, just as an example, with the first one, education. Is education, I'm not sure how I understand education being a demographic, but I'm not sure how it would be a equity indicator, or am I reading that wrong? But what?
I don't know that Francine and I can answer that. I'm not sure how it's measured as an equity indicator, what the intent was, but so I would just be making a guess.
Yeah, I assume, I understand it to be educating kind of our staff of this importance of DEI, and making it a priority, and focusing not only internally, but also externally to the community that we serve, to you know, groups that we provide contracts to and service agreements to, that we're always looking at kind of, you know, making sure that we're inclusive and that we're making it important.
Have we done anything to change any of our record keeping with regard to demographics in terms of our employees?
Well, yeah, so basically we did add we have to report the statistics of the demographics of our workforce. And what we did add is in ADP, we added a non-binary gender, because now employees can come forward with a California driver's license and be a non, you know, it's I think it's called non-binary, and not choose either a male or female. And our demographic reporting will require us to separate that. We have to give, you know, an employee the option, so we did have that, non-binary option. And then what we'll be doing, especially with this recruitment, is that we, you know, will be kind of looking at, you know, especially with all this outreach, what, you know, the demographics of the applicant pool that we're pulling in. And kind of watching them through the process, like we looked at when we brought it to the board for the primary recruitment. We kind of were able to see how different groups felt, you know, out of the process. And we want to ensure that we don't have those artificial barriers and that we're kind of carrying the same percentage through, you know, provided that everyone's meeting the qualifications, we're carrying them through, we're not creating artificial barriers.
So let's take something like ethnic background or something. Is that something that might be reported on in their records?
Yeah, so basically it's voluntary at time of application and at time of hire, we require them to fill it out because we have to report the demographics of our hires.
But they can opt out of reporting it, is that right?
They can opt out at time of application, or they at time of hire, they can say that they don't want, you know, attest to it. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, do we specify the categories, or are these self-reported categories?
These are the categories that are in our payroll system that we actually have to report to the state on. So these are basically standard categories.
The state establishes.
Yeah, the state is, we're not
The
creating.
vendors that
Yeah,
provide.
so for our EO report.
Program them into the software.
Yeah. So it's driven by the state and ADP, you know.
Sometimes, for example, on the police department, they observe something, and so they make a guess about ethnicity, but they don't actually ask about it. I wasn't sure how we gathered that.
So we ask them that basically when someone hires,
Okay,
then we ask for the information.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no.
No, go ahead.
I have
If you're
trouble
gonna-
to add, so it's good.
Oh, mine's not that, not a lot, but it is about number 3, which is representation outreach.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the various papers here, and I think it's a great start. I mean, so, but I'm looking at the Chinese papers in particular, right? In looking at this, I also think that maybe some of the other Asian papers should be included, because it's not just Chinese in terms of the Asian population, right?
Yeah.
And if you look up and down the Bay Area, the peninsula, actually down to San Jose, from Daly City to San Jose, right? And even out towards Fremont in the East Bay, when you've got Vietnamese, Filipino, East Asian Indian, they're not going to read the Chinese papers, right? And each team has their own paper. And so I would look at some of those. I feel like up in Daly City, Pacifica, that area would have a large Filipino population, right? And then Vietnamese maybe down in San Jose, East Asian Indian out in the East Bay and Fremont. And so definitely, because then it, you know, we're not like all the Chinese Asian brains, right? And then the other thing is, in terms of the actual Chinese papers, instead of Lin newspaper, which I'm not even familiar with, I would advertise in the World Journal,
Okay.
which is,
I know the little.
yeah, I mean,
They
and
advertise
Cooper
it.
Cleaner saying that it's huge, huge, and it's throughout the Bay Area, right? And so Singapore is also a good place. But I would suggest maybe looking at these other papers, not to do every single one. I don't know what the Japanese or Korean papers are like. I'm sure you've got them. I'm not familiar with them. But the areas that have a higher concentration of Asian residents, like in San Jose and the East Bay and further north, you know, you might be able to have better luck if you looked at those community papers. Yeah. That's my suggestion. Well, because those are outreach points, right? That
And I forgot about World Journal, but yeah.
Yeah,
you know,
World Journal is huge.
Daily, yeah.
Yeah. So I would just focus on those two and not men. I don't even know what men.
If anyone is aware of them, I mean, this came from when I did the staff report in December, me Googling and
Yeah,
trying to
no,
figure
I
out what
know,
was
I know,
out there.
I know. But I mean, I think
So,
that's, I don't
you're
want to get
aware.
us stuck in this rut where, you know, everyone thinks
Sure.
that Asians are like the Chinese group, right,
Right.
that kind of thing. It actually,
He definitely wanted diversify
Yeah.
and, you know, and try to reach as many people. We'll all look into the other publications and we will be tracking it. So we can see.
and even if there's a Pacific Islander paper, I don't know, I mean, I just don't know. Because if you look at our population in East Palo Alto too, right, then you would probably be the Spanish language papers. I don't know the main ones, but they seem to be, like, I just don't know.
I think we did a fantastic job with
Yeah, thank
capturing the essence or part of the initial drive to begin to look internally regarding what the district has done and is participating in right now. Since last year, that man, I was a lot of work, and I appreciate that very much. I think it's a good start, and I think there are more to be done. I'm sure you're aware of that, and particularly I think it's important for the board to kind of wrap its head around the true essence of the initial document that was sent out when we first got started. And I just so happen to have a copy of it with me, because I felt like that just be reminded of what we're focusing in on here. And the document was titled the DEI metric focus on the employee life cycle. And what that document indicated that there were 9 different areas that the district should begin to think about focus on. One of them has to do with hiring, and we went over some of the initial work. The other one has to do with representation and retention, advancement, job satisfaction and enhancement. The survey, I think, kind of. I'm really excited that 135 out of 144 people responded to that particular document. There is a interest, from my perspective, it seems like there is an interest somewhere in terms of what they saw, and they wanted to hear more of it, or at least turn in the survey. So from that, I'm not sure how you glean information in terms of where to go with that from the survey. There's also employee resources, participation, accessibility, which I think through the debt program, the outreach out in the community, given that first step of how do we access that information? How do we know that the firefighter position exists, or any position in the district exists? Leadership in terms of how do you promote that? How the district promoting that? What if there is, 20% increase within the fire district in terms of folks of color, women, disabled that comes into the district? How then will the current system? How then the current system will help support and develop those leaders in some way? Gary mentioned about the cadet program in terms of mentors. How do you choose a mentor for an African American? There's none, only one that is still here, and that person is totally inundated. How do you pick someone else to mentor that particular person? Because my understanding about firefighters is that my dad was in it, my uncle was in it, my whole family was in it. So they get all the 411, as you say, up front. don't, but you got a new person coming in that have not experienced it. How do they get the, and I think that's where the mentorship, and not that anybody can fit that role, but how do you choose a person, you know, to go with a particular cadet? And those are just one aspect, that's a category, as well as the supply part, in terms of, we do business, we spend a lot of money on things, or do we really outreach out to those, third world folks, in terms of with the business? It's all like, I've been using Joe for 50, 100 years, Joe and his family, Joe and his family have been doing a good job with it. But, you know, are you moving into opening that up to everyone else, you know, in terms of understanding, if we do. And so the content, there are content areas, I think, within each one of those 9 sectors that we really need to focus on. And there is through this document, has a list of content areas that we need to try to figure out, gather data from. Through those particular areas, and sometimes, you know, trying to, you know, I'm no expert, trying to put together the question or the areas that, you know, how do we glean that document, that information, so that we can begin to understand a little bit clearer, both from I hate to use the term, but it's kind of the only thing I got right now, a black and white, whether how we're doing the information that was initially put together by Francine was great information. It talked about through the last hiring process, who got hired, you know, how many, and who did not come in for an interview. We need to capture that data, and that's where the content information within the categories are so important. And developing which board needs to do, the board is among the staff to develop those categories. Because then it becomes, once we understand the data, the data that comes from it, we begin to look at trying to look at policy, staff can begin to look at procedures in terms of how do we then begin to try to fix that? How do we begin to enhance the possibility of people that are not like us to get into the system? This is where it started, and I think the board really needs, or should do, in terms of being to giving staff the go ahead, you know, the green door, purple door, but everyone to go through and make it happen. And that may mean bringing someone else in to help out and help them identify those data points and ways in which we can collect it. That information that is non-threatening, that adheres to all policies. Because I think until we get a real good, better, clear picture of the process, because it's taking the person to the front door and to make it, helping them and make sure the system is equitable through all the way to the back door. And the back door is, to me, is retirement. How do we make sure that our system is sensitive enough to have a leeway for people to go through the whole process, no matter who they may be. And I think that's the work that needs to be done. And I think as a board, we need to figure this thing out too, in terms of understanding ourselves as it relates to the policies we put together, procedures we put together, and what impact is some of that may have. So, but anyway, I'm going to stop right there because there's more.
Well, this is just the beginning process.
Yeah, but it is, and that's why it's terrific.
Moving pretty quickly considering where we were.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have done a tremendous job, and I think there's the data points, and the proper on the data points is important, just like the people that took that test, you know, the 135. That's information as, you know, how many going through the cadet program. When those kind of numbers that fits into those categories, that I think is important for the board to hear, because it reflects upon the good job that you're doing in terms of to going in that direction and creating this opportunity for people, as well as the board to kind of understand, how we are doing in terms of meeting certain obligations, certain goals we might set for ourselves. And right now we have really, last year we tried to set certain goals and certain parameters, but we didn't really get to that point. In setting goals all policy, because we didn't have information that we need to glean more policy from.
I would add that the system and the process that
Do you think up a little bit?
I would add that the system that Robert was just talking about in terms of the whole lifespan of somebody going through the system would actually be a system that would encourage people to even want to be a part of, part of fire protection district,
But I think once we understand that we tackle one particular problem, but I think we'll be tackling another. One of the things that I heard when I got on the board 5 years ago, that people being promoted because of who they knew in the system. And it was kind of flabbergasted me. I was like, whoa, and the way he was talking to me about it, I'm trying to think, well, I don't know how that could happen, but that may be a reality, but it may not. I don't know. So we got to start looking at how the people get promoted. So that gets into this whole thing that I think somewhere we had this conversation earlier or this year, last year, about how do people get promoted? What evaluation tool will we use to evaluate the individual? And are there biases written into that particular tool? I don't know. I'm not sure. But we don't have the data to find out to know if it has or not. So that's part of this particular document. I think what the board needs to take a look at it again. If you don't have it, if you have it, fine, give you a copy of it. But to take a look at that and approve that one particular process, developing the data we need to finish the evaluation.
And we think that we need to come back and bring updates like this to the board to kind of give the status. I really do like the ideas of, I like the mentorship, I like having someone you have kind of that ready, and and I think that's really kind of important as well, like having that engagement. And then also one thing that we are also going to be doing too that I forgot to mention for the recruit is because recruits can do ride along, but like you said, sometimes it's your uncle and you have everyone in the family, and so it's easy for you to kind of step into the role. And some people it may not be as easy, and so we want to have an open house where maybe everyone can come and feel welcome to learn when we're doing the recruitment, learn about the position, and it won't feel so overwhelming if it's just the one person going through the station. We're welcoming everyone, and everyone's going to get some information, and it's going to feel very comfortable. And open the doors.
Right, and I think that the type of
I was going
no, I would say I think that even creating that I won't call it a program, but like a program being able to not only recruits understand what their role is, but the person the mentor understanding what their role is and being evaluated based upon their ability to disseminate information about whatever it is that they need to learn, because not everybody can be a good mentor. They may talk about it, but may not necessarily be a good mentor. So how do you evaluate that so that the person that is being matched up with that person, knowing that they are getting what they need to get from their mentor at that point, and vice versa. So it should be a two-way street as well. So
I wanted to share an anecdote to kind of illustrate how difficult all this is, and just from my personal experience. And I'm not sure if other people have experienced it. Certainly, my experience is about that big, and it's very tiny, but it so happens that my father was Jewish, my mother was Episcopalian, and I inherited a Jewish last name. So people would sometimes assume that I'm Jewish. As part of my work with the fire district, about, I don't know, 6 years ago or so, I was asked to play Santa Claus at the toy giveaway, and I've done that for about 4 or 5 years. And I was accepted by, certainly all the firefighters. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I even got to use some of my limited Spanish with people, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But I want to just give you the anecdote about this, because to me, in another situation, it actually risks a lawsuit or hard feelings or failure or whatever, because at some point, one of the firefighters discovered that it was really funny to call me Santa Steen. And, it's mildly funny. And I wasn't offended at all, and I'm not offended now, and I'm sharing it kind of open-heartedly. But, making a joke about something is a very risky thing to do. And some people could be offended by something similar. I mean, again, that wasn't offensive, but it could very easily go into something that was offensive. And I'm saying this because I think we're going to need to talk with our employees about whether the subject of inclusion is something to be talked about or avoided. And somehow we need to let people know that what they think is funny, somebody else might not think is funny, and making a joke of one thing is perhaps not a joke for another person, or might seem like some form of discrimination or something of that sort. So I'm just giving this limited example to say, again, it's not a problem for me, but pushed a little further, or if I were of a different ethnicity or a different linguistic background or whatever, it could border on being offensive. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think, while I think the voluntary training is appropriate, I understand why we did it. I think at some point we may want to set up guidelines about, do you talk about these things or do you not? How do you do it? And so forth. So anyway, I'm just sharing that just for your knowledge.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And that actually kind of leads well into the training that we did offer, because that was kind of the way that they set up the scenarios, is that, someone would say something and they're like, gosh, I didn't really know someone would take it offensive. But it's really kind of having that self-reflection and openness to maybe some implicit biases and how to kind of correct that. But I also do agree is that, and I know that Chief would like to too, is that, we want to kind of progress this into something more personal, where we do have these like kind of sessions, that are in person, and we're kind of talking about this and sharing. And this was just kind of that first step into kind of opening the door and kind of having people think about it. But it is true. And so thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
I want to share experience with everyone here, and it's nothing to get sentimental about so crying or anything like that. But it's just the reality. When I first got to San Jose State, that's where I went to college, and I majored in psychology. Got my BA in psychology, and a master's later on. The first class I ever went into was Psych 101 class. And this particular instructor, this was during the hippie days, so somebody probably wasn't born about it. I think Rob probably won't want it.
That's not a compliment, Rob.
I don't know, I was probably a policeman then, I don't know.
I went to the class, and this one professor was the property, and the class was all about how, getting to know one another, as a start to kind of understand one another. And it was so weird to me because, I was the only African American person in the classroom. And coming from part of my life living in South Central LA, to relate to that one, And then, some other areas, it was different, especially, here a young boy coming up out of the South, you know, into these areas, it was like panic city. When they get to San Jose State, it was even terrifying, you know, but I learned how to adjust to it. But while we was in the class, this one professor that everybody had to stand up, get in a line. And there was two people behind them brought on the verses in your class. And the object of it was being able to trust it. Learn how to trust people. And you had to fall backwards. You know, trust, now here it is, only African American classroom. And this is where my bias is starting. You know, and it was much smaller than I were. One of them was a woman. You know, I'm saying, I said, can I be last? And they got, no, it's your turn. So I got up. I kid you not. The guy and the young woman behind me. I mean, she was probably, I say, Virginia height. You know, about Francine weights that in terms of petiteness. And I felt, it took me almost 5 minutes, but everybody had to do it. And when I finally closed my eyes and let go, I found myself, because, you know, they caught me. You know, I was absolutely surprised. So I say that all of this is a fearful kind of scenario thing that we're talking about in the DEI. There's a lot of things that you have to give up, you know, and that was plugged up here in our mind. That's what creates us. That's what creates our excitement, our emotion, our fear factor. You know, every time I look at the sheet that's going on across country, you know, there's a fear factor there that's being created. So how do you debunk that? How do you demystify that? And I'm not asking everybody to get up and close eyes and let go. But somewhere in the research of our mind, we have to begin to figure out. But we need to know that they exist. Right. That fear exists. And it's only that from what I know is that once we get to look at data that's kind of out there that shows where we maybe can improve on, where areas that we're doing quite successful in. We need to shout to the rooftop, those areas that we're doing successful on, and we really need to work hard to try to work on that stuff that's hidden that we really not know as an institution as well as the board. Because we will set policy based upon what we think we know. And we really know, we need to know how we impact that. It's like we sit here and grill Alan about the numbers. You know, I mean, we need to drill this situation just in that same vein and that same manner. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm off my soapbox now. But
I'm gonna add one more thing.
tell you this story.
And it's not a story, but it does pertain to these shootings that happened in Half Moon Bay. Because what I noticed there when I went to go and translate was that there was a complete lack of cultural appropriateness and understanding and recognition of the needs and of actually, quite frankly, the Chinese farm worker, for example, because we're so used to looking at various groups that might need help and think that they need help more than other groups, especially the Asian groups, for various reasons. I don't want to get into the cultural constructs about this, but I do think that we have to look at culture as well, and especially, you know, we actually have a pretty diverse district. If you look at East Palo Alto, Belhaven, North Fair Oaks, and you probably even Atherton, you know, in Merlot, probably if you look at the Asian population, right? And it's a very diverse Asian population. In fact, I would say that in this 11% disparity between the wage gap, and you see it in our district right now, right? Between Atherton and East Palo Alto, for example. So I just want us to be cognizant of the fact that being culturally appropriate and I hate to use cultural competence, I think we're all competent. I just think that sometimes we can go a little less than that. When we move forward. At least the Asian population, I think there's this kind of a lack of understanding.
Well, there's the data Robert talked about, there's awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the shootings in Half Moon Bay, I would say that the vast majority of the San Mateo County community didn't really realize that there were Asian farm workers.
The farm worker community knew.
The farm worker community too, but not outside of
Right.
that area.
Well, that's correct, but then there are people.
Awareness.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but they don't think that you're going to have literally Chinese peasants living here.
Yeah.
That's what they are, they're uneducated.
That's what I'm saying, it's awareness. Well, you can call it education, you can call it awareness, but
No,
I
I'm
think
talking
that-
about where they
yeah.
are socioeconomically and education level,
yeah,
where they don't even speak English.
right. No, I understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but I agree, the awareness is something there, even within their own city right now.
But I tend to agree with Robert, you've got to start measuring
Yeah,
some of these
yeah,
things,
but
and you
it's-
really have to track progress.
Yeah.
Drill down in the data to support whether we're making progress or we're not
Right.
making progress, and
But you have
whether
to-
the unintended biases are still, kind of in the way of, forward progress as well.
Right, but you don't even understand that there could be an issue, you wouldn't even know what to measure, right?
I totally agree.
Well, I think, I guess, staff still was regulation from.
No, I think, do you need, certainly we're accepting the
Right.
report, but maybe the HR community bring up that chart and refine it and have to bring it to the next board meeting, do you want to approve?
Whatever recommendation is that.
I thought that's what I heard, but you're not the same staff in what direction?
No, I was gonna ask you that, that's the question.
Oh, no, maybe
Say,
direction.
Just in listening to the conversation of the board, yes, they give us guidance and direction and. There are things, we in the work groups are trying to create an environment where we can have safe, respectful conversations and appreciate the diversity of everywhere where people come. That's what Francine and her group have started doing with the diversity dialogues training, our potluck on Monday. We are volunteering at the ecumenical hunger group tomorrow. Yeah, we're helping feed some people, just.
Being there.
Yeah, it's just being there and part of it is just us being able to appreciate each other for our differences and be able to have respectful conversations. And part of it is we haven't done a whole lot of that in our organization. We're starting to take these really wonderful small steps. And I think people, especially when they hear leadership talking about it, they understand that it is important and it's not threatening and it's super powerful. And but there's needs for things, those are hard to measure, and there's some things that we need to measure too. So anyway, I think we got good direction and guidance from the board just in the commentary.
To the board, I think, Chair, I think that one thing is that HR can continue to try to have flush out and because it's not only for staff, but it's also need to happen for the board as well. So we need to, I think we need to figure out, flush that out, see what that's going to look like. And then begin to make it happen. So that would be my recommendation to the board.
Your comments were educational for sure.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments? I'm gonna move on to item 8. Thank you, Father. Thank you. So item 8 is discuss the use and future purpose of the 28 Almondale Avenue properties. Which is, this gets you the paper, and Gary's been very patient in going to the meeting,
Yeah.
so is the chief. So Mark, you wanna just kick this?
I will tee it up and then really kind of give it over to Director Bloom, who understands the conversations that Abington's been having related to their housing element. So the purpose of this report was really for us to have a conversation and maybe put to bed, at least for the time being, what the intentions of the district are. Attached to the staff report the staff report gives a little bit of information. And also, after that 28 Almond Draw parcel was purchased, there was a flurry of staff reports talking about a variety of different uses for it. All we know is that for sure, it was agreed upon that we were going to build an auxiliary building there because that is happening, and we've awarded the contract and we have permits. And but the other parts, we really haven't done anything. It currently serves as storage for the UAS stand. The LRAD is there. There's a trailer, an old FEMA trailer there. And anyway, with that, Director Bloom, I will. You sat in on a lot of the city council meetings. I'll let you guide and lead it, or Director Crawley, however you.
So I'll jump in. I'll mention it just on the Zoom session. Diana Hawkins, who's the liaison to our district from Atherton as well. And so just pointing out that she has been listening in to the board meeting. So a little bit of the history on this. So the Atherton's been working on their housing element, like all cities, trying to get something through the state and make their submissions and put those approvals in. A couple months ago, there was a housing coalition that came forward with some counter proposals and other ideas. And one of the ideas that had surfaced was the potential of staff housing or some form of helping the housing element submission by taking advantage of the 32 Almond Draw property, or 28 Almond Draw property, I guess, that the district had acquired. These staff reports were helpful because I didn't have all the history of what the intent was or anything else, so that was certainly helpful. There's a few updates I can give you that I think are worth for Diana to hear as well, but a few updates. One is the local news has reported now, and Bill Whitmer, the mayor, has responded to it, that the housing element was not approved again. And the state came back with another round of go do more work. You'll need more than ADUs and other things that were represented. The town councils continue to look at various properties, whether it's the property on Santiago, property over Sully near Redwood City, the properties along El Camino Real where there's public transportation and so forth. So I think they're continuing to broaden their scope on it. And during the course of the meetings, they continue to come back to, well, what about this property? Recognizing that the town is trying to, reach out to any possible ideas to try to meet the requirements of the housing element, because there is remedies in the legislation that would allow a developer at some point to just say, well, I'm just gonna go do this and bypass the town approval process altogether. So that's where the foundation of this was. It was for the district the board to have some discussion about the plans for the site. It is worth noting, and something that I was getting clarification on from the chief as well, is that the accessory building structure that is going up at Station 3 is actually using part of the parcel from the acquired property.
Right.
Okay, so that's important to note. So the way that property works, and the chief and I went out and actually did a little walk around it as well, if it's helpful for me, is it's actually a flag lot. So that the property actually goes back behind Station 3 Firehouse. It's acquired, and it's done that way. Yeah, it's two separate parcels. So you basically have a flag lot, which is 28 Almond Draw, and then you have the firehouse that's within the flag, the front side of the flag. And the accessory structure is going directly behind the firehouse on part of the property that was acquired through the parcel. Even though the district has not, from all these staff reports, has not merged the property or the parcels. I think it's well spoken as to the pros and cons of merging it and what future development might look like. And I don't think, for the purpose of this discussion, I wanted to surface it here so that the board at least begins having the discussion about what the intent of the property is and if there's any plans on it. I don't see it as this discussion being something that we're trying to draw a conclusion that says we have a point of view on it, as much as getting the board aware of the situation with the property, what the history of it was, the fact that our accessory structure is, on part of that property, so it's not as big of an empty parcel as it might look, because we're starting construction on accessory structure already. So that's kind of teeing it up. The only other thing I would just point out for Diana's benefit, there was reference in some commentary from one of the council members about the green swimming pool at the property, and maybe we could do something about it. That has been removed. So the green swimming pool no longer exists. This green swimming pool, in the satellite image of the property or aerial view, there is a very green algae filled swimming pool, and that has been filled in. It's not just filled in, it's been removed. Yeah, and it's very clear in the reports that was recommendation at the time it was acquired to just demolish the swimming pool, and that has since happened. So that's that's kind of the cleaning up the situation, and I think over time it's morphed a little bit with the town towards the potential for staff housing onto that property versus workforce housing, I should say, versus some form of subsidized housing, low cost housing, or anything else. The reality is the structure is not, or the property is not big enough to make a meaningful impact on their overall housing element.
So asking us to discuss the use and future purpose. So what kind of direction do you want from us? I mean, the historical, I have things for including that in this report. And Michelle, you probably had to gather these reports. But I wanted to put these in here so that the public could see as well that, it wasn't as if we haven't discussed the uses, the potential uses for the property, even when we bought it, but it's been a subject of discussion for many years. And so I don't know if you want, what kind of direction you want from us tonight.
And there doesn't need to be any, it's putting it on your radar, knowing obviously it's a topic that's out there in the public realm right now. So if the board doesn't have any specific direction, I know that was one of the things we had talked about was forming an ad hoc committee to talk about. Right. So it might be one of those things that gets referred to a currently non-existent ad hoc committee. Right. So, but it's, at least it makes the board aware of it. And, there's a map that basically shows a diagram, but half the property is still there, and probably there needs to be some consideration for station expansion at some point in time, and then the rest can be, they're like up to the will of the board.
I think, for what is on the table right now, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that the district reiterate its intent to expand Station 3 at this location.
Do you want a motion? I mean, that's kind of what the property was bought for.
I just want to reiterate that, so that's my motion.
Yeah, I just want to be careful with the wording of the motion.
What is the second? Okay. We have a discussion. I just, okay.
Yeah.
So now we'll have the discussion.
Okay, so just, I just want to be mindful of when I read the reports is that there's not a scenario under which you can really expand Station 3 the way into that property. You could add an accessory structure, which is what we're doing, but an actual expansion would mean that the setbacks and everything else would have changed. You'd actually have to, from my reading of the report, you'd have to merge the parcel together and then build the firehouse, a new station with appropriate setbacks for, I forget the zoning of a firehouse, PFS. Facility. So it's not a matter of just add on to the existing building. It's, you really have to kind of pick it up and move it over and use the center of the property.
I thought we were going to tear it down entirely and build new. But let me just say, I don't know how they approved a building crossing property lines that have two different zonings.
It's not,
Or you said it was on the,
it's an accessory structure.
the.
So,
Still, I don't
It's
see how
on
it
the
could
other
cross.
lot.
Oh, it's on the other
it's
lot.
on the.
Yeah,
I thought you were
not
planning it on
crossing.
both lots.
Yeah.
That's on the other lot.
No, Gary, if I'm correct, the clarification. What I thought I heard was that the new structure, there would be some parts of it on the existing, the other lot.
No, you know, that's correct.
So.
So it's not,
With the
when I say
AC.
the other lot, it's the accessory structure is entirely on the parcel of 28 Almond Draw,
The
The-
property,
the new property.
right, that we, yeah.
So the-
But it's the setbacks and everything else are because it's an accessory structure. So it can be closer to the fence line on the side. It doesn't have to be in the middle of the property. It doesn't have those requirements, zone residential.
Right.
So it's a residential zoning and we're building an accessory unit
In the back.
in the back
side.
or on that.
That's what I
On the
thought.
other lot, the side lot,
That's
yeah.
correct.
So,
I'm not trying to be a zoning expert, I'm just going by what I've read.
Robert knows about zoning.
well, but part of what I think the question is that the approval has been already, everything been approved by the city of Pasadena
Yeah.
to put this accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, this started in 2017,
Not
right?
necessarily dwelling, but an accessory unit.
Well,
It's not.
is it a dwelling unit or is this a storage or
Engine bay, restroom.
1,200 square feet? Yeah, okay. Accessory, so there's no living there.
Right.
So the real question is, if it's, back to Chuck's original question, if it's gonna be for the original use, or the intended use, which was to focus on housing, I guess it's really of some sort, that we need to figure out, we need to sort that issue out first, because once the dwelling unit goes up, I assume that will probably acknowledge want to spend money putting it up and then tearing it down later on. I mean, that's okay, that happens all the time. So and that's what I thought the motion is that was just made, was to actually for the intended purpose or use that we initially talked about in terms of expanding redoing the building a new station and adding this workforce housing as a result of it.
There was never any discussion of workforce housing ever.
No, it was temporary housing.
We were gonna rent it in the meantime when we.
Right.
I always thought it was gonna also look at, like that doesn't, that auxiliary building, the expanded parking too. That,
Robert, my understanding, at least, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the construction of the accessory building there, that building would not need to be torn down if you were then to build a new station.
right.
So it'd be an accessory building to the new fire station.
That's design, I think, okay. Yeah, but then that
But
it makes
station,
it build it and then
Yeah,
work
Right.
around. Now, the question then becomes, at that point, merging the lots. Because it sounds like you're gonna have to merge the lots in order to expand this station there.
but station 3, I don't know where station 3 is on our priority list of,
At this point, I don't think we have made a priority, we just going and, you know.
no, in terms of the station renovations. We had 2, 6,
I
4.
understand that, but
can we
at
come
this
back,
point,
can we
it's
go
a-
back to the motion just for a second? Can I ask a clarifying question for Director Bernstein, which is your motion essentially saying you just want to preserve the original intended purpose, which was to potential future expansion or future station 3, essentially,
For
use of the
operations.
property for operations,
That's why,
nothing to do with housing.
that's why we brought it.
Oh, right.
And
Just
Yeah.
we don't, we're not about to sell it to a developer for
Yeah,
housing.
right, yeah.
Now, if somebody came along and offered us $100 million.
That might be a,
I think we
then
can
it's
consider.
negotiable.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So that makes a lot of sense, but I think it's still, we still gotta focus on the fact that we still have to complete that one task, from my understanding, that we're gonna have to at some point merge those lots in order to create this expansion of the fire station.
That's covered in the staff report.
Yeah.
So we can, Chuck, if you want to restate the motion in different words.
No, I think the words were fine.
I just wanted you.
I just want to reiterate our original intention to expand Station 3 on that property.
Station 3 or, I know, but I mean, I'm having a little bit of a heartache right now based on what Gary's saying. Because it's not only to expand Station 3, but I guess it's for the use of fire district operations too, right? Because what if we don't expand Station 3?
All we're doing is we're talking about right now, we're not prepared to sell it or do anything to it. We're just keeping it to expand Station 3.
Station 3, okay.
I mean, if something changed, we could always consider a change, but we're not there
Okay, I'm fine with that. So there is your motion and Rob seconded. Any other discussions? Yeah.
So then we'll get to the actual motion of the division that Chief will look for right here.
I don't think the
There's
chief
not a
was
motion.
looking for a motion.
But it's fine to you may,
Make the
you
motion, a
can
motion.
make this motion, it's consistent with the.
So then.
But you should take the public comment.
I will, but the thing is, I just want to say that any other ancillary discussion could happen at that ad hoc committee meeting, which I'm gonna be forming.
This is not, there's not gonna be action, the chief is not gonna go out.
I
and
know that.
build the building tomorrow, there's no, this is just a statement of board policy
Okay.
tonight.
Okay, that's fine. So there's a motion from Chuck and a second from Rob. And so do you have any hands raised on that? I'll take public comment now on this issue. I think that, I don't know if Diana's still here, if anyone else has a comment.
There are no raised hands. If anybody has a public comment, they can raise their hand or use the press star 9 on their phone.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna close public comment now, and then we'll just take the roll call.
Okay, Director Bernstein,
Aye.
Director Bloom,
Aye.
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Solomon,
Aye.
Director Crowley.
Aye, so that motion carries. So thank you, Gary, for
Probably enough for the discussion.
for being at these meetings and thank you, Chief, for. Okay, item 9, which is to set a schedule for a periodic and year-end review of board goals. That was. So there's no staff report, but I think Gary, the chief.
Yeah, that item is kind of a lot of the goal setting process, which is just for us to pick a particular meeting that we want to go through the goals. My recommendation is at this stage, we should probably do the June meeting.
Yeah.
It's at the 6 month mark.
Yeah.
Unless
So Michelle, so is everyone okay with that?
this is correct. Yeah, this is the
The review of the year-end review of the board goal. I mean, at the semi-annual market, we could probably just put that on to see where we are, to get a status check on where we are in our board goals at the June meeting. Does that work for you? Yeah, June meeting. Does that work for you? Okay, so that means, Michelle, for an agenda item for June, we'll put an update on, board goals. Got it. Okay, moving on to propose.
Can I just ask a question about
Sure.
that? Who's gonna make these reports
Which report?
on the goals?
Because it'll be.
Say they were his goals, or they were the goals of the board.
Who has the goals, right? I mean,
Right,
Again,
I mean, if we say we're gonna have a discussion about something, well, okay.
I'll volunteer to take the lead on preparing for that discussion of the goals, because I don't think it's really the chief's goals, these are the goals for the board.
we're not.
And no, but we need to just have a reporting process to update the board on how we're doing on
Yeah, that is.
and I'll help collate with that in the process.
It occurred to me that some of them might have been assigned to a committee, in which case they, I just wasn't sure.
They are, yeah,
They
some
are.
of them are assigned committees, and some of them are assigned to staff or staff, things staff was already working on. some cases.
Robert,
But that's part of the purpose, Chuck, of doing the periodic review is to figure out, okay, which ones did we catch? Which ones are falling through and getting no attention?
That's all this.
Well, no, but where do we want to assign those things?
the status update is where we are, what might need to be worked on and.
Right.
Robert, do you have any comments?
No, nothing.
Okay, so that's being considered the periodic review and not like fiscal year end review.
Yeah, it's just
No,
periodic.
board goal.
Periodic
Board
review.
goals. Yeah. That's a board goals. Okay, any other discussion on this? This is not when we do the proposed agenda items. Does anyone have a proposed agenda item? Okay, then reports and requests, so committee reports, emergency preparedness.
So emergency prep, we did need that. Hold on, Dick. Yeah, they're faster than I thought you were gonna get that.
No, we can get it from start.
Go to HR and come back to me.
I think we pretty much done everything for HR, so I haven't been beyond what I've already been talking about.
I want to thank Francine for with this and that. It was a long time coming, so I think we're making progress.
Please speak up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just thanking Francine. It's a long time coming to the DEI. Issue, and I'm just glad that we've got support in that area from staff. So thank you.
Could I ask one question, because I didn't think it came to me without really any explanation. I got something in my email, it's still there, and I hadn't had time yet to do it, but I had something related to DEI, which was a video to. Could you kind of put that into context, or is that something that were we going to discuss that? Was that just something you thought we'd be interested in? Was it kind of an FYI thing?
Yeah.
What's the intent?
So I think that was, I think Director Bloom had asked that I share that, and so I shared it with the entire board. That was I think I had mentioned that was the training that sent to all employees, and if you were interested in watching it, that was the diversity dialogue training, the interactive training. And it's only, I think, maybe like 35 minutes or 30 minutes.
And the recommendation would be for us to view it. Is that?
Well, I mean, if you want to.
And I wasn't sure if it was just a matter to put it in our records, or if it was for us to view also.
Just for you to view if you'd like to view it and see what we shared with staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about the Atherton meeting that Chief already covered. They have meetings, we reviewed that there. We did have further discussion about giving staff direction about evaluating potential communication techniques. This is being responsive to much of the dialogue that occurred relative to the storms, if the people weren't getting timely information, which then led to the dialogue as to, okay, what is the actual role of Menlo Park Fire Protection District in that communication out to our communities, and then what are the possible technologies that are there. So this was really the committee just trying to give additional input to staff so that they can go do a staff report and report back on it. Do you have anything?
That was really good conversation.
Yeah.
The brainstorming. And,
Yeah.
Great.
And then the final thing we talked about was we started to work on preparing for the study session. As you'll recall, the board, we had talked at the board about making that study session about the community volunteer disaster response with the leaders, make that a board level study session. And we just have more work to do on preparing for that. So Michelle had asked me if I thought we were ready to put that on the agenda, and I felt we were not, and that the committee still has to do more work. And then we also had an opportunity to meet our new volunteer coordinator, Heather, and so we got introduced to her and had dialogue with her about, kind of looking forward as to what we hope to see. Chuck, I don't know if you have anything to add.
That was everything.
Yeah.
Thanks, finance, Ron. We exhausted. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, finance, the only thing we haven't covered is Task Force 3. Gary and I had a few questions. Gary has been past 50 in Task Force 3. And we wanted to know from the chief, the amount of personnel participating agency, either full or part-time assignment, and the relationship between the backfill aspect, whether they're deployed or not, and BC 10% time, where it looks like it's more than 10%. So we wanted a realistic breakdown to that. So I think we covered everything else.
Yeah, I think everything else is covered. We spent a lot of time on the budget, going through questions about the budget and further dialogue about kind of trying to get to a final form for the capital for improvement. Yeah, the forecasting and everything on that, and chiefs and staff working on that. So we added a couple columns to the table, and but otherwise that was.
Yeah, and we went over that.
Yeah, but most everything was covered in the meeting.
And so for the payments that I thought was good information, we're gonna have to approve that in a budget. Or
I think it's gonna be approved.
Part of
oh,
it.
is it? Okay. Usually, I know, but usually, well, maybe I'm getting it mixed up.
There may be some other parts that.
Maybe, okay, never mind.
Funding on that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's good, yes.
Approved.
Yeah,
Like 1 year, 2
yeah.
years, we usually come up at different times.
Yeah.
And also, you know, since we were talking about that, we talked about the large amount of money that we front to Air Force.
For the deployment.
For not only the deployments, but that funding that just hangs there. And chief was gonna look into that.
$3 million.
Oh,
The 3 million.
the 1.4.
Yeah, I can't remember if that, did we have the conversation surrounding the $3 million in the reserve balance?
Yeah, we're confusing topics here. So the 1.45 is the grants amount.
Yeah.
And Elaine followed up with answers to all the questions we had raised about the budgeting process for that 1.45. And separately, chief, in the reserve budget, there is a $3 million line item, which is the money that would be necessary to front a series of deployments. And I think, chief, you had agreed you're gonna revisit whether that number needs to be 3 million or whether that was excessive.
Correct.
An excessive reserve.
Okay, so that will be something you would have by approval, right?
That might happen in a fund balance policy conversation with the board. As we look at it holistically, you know, and whether that's necessary.
Okay.
We had some research it before to see if it was required by the contract or if it was just a good practice. So apparently it was a recommendation, but not a requirement.
I can't imagine that Oakland, who sponsors a task force and is pretty much broke, has $3 million sitting in their.
Well, I know. But so I don't want, I mean,
Oakland on it.
but it's just looking at, you should also look at why that fund is established, so that.
Oh, sure. I mean, we will always have enough reserves to take care of our ability to do deployments and front the money for deployments. Whether we need to permanently tie it for.
And that
Will be
help.
part of that conversation,
Yeah.
But this time we've got that 387,000 or whatever that they haven't paid. They've never been that slow.
Yeah, the reimbursement.
We used to get it 3 to 6 months, and now they're going a year more than that. It's just very private.
I believe Elaine updated the committee that did get one more payment.
It did,
and Got a partial.
It's so.
Yeah, not all, it's not all in, but
Not the whole thing.
but more of it.
It sounds like we're financing the federal government.
It's-
We got a bigger reserve than they do.
Exactly.
Now why we're looking at how we're gonna do UAL. Payment.
With the
Pay
new-
now.
with the new Senate, they've got a cash flow problem.
Okay, so liaison reports, Town of Atherton, Gary,
I have nothing further to report.
East Palo Alto, Robert,
I have a meeting set up with the city manager Friday. And Chief, I don't know if you have had a chance to talk to him about joint meetings with him.
Yeah, he said he was interested. It'd be great if you had continuing that conversation.
Yeah, I actually talked to him about.
Midland Park, Chuck.
Just a real brief thing which I'm not directly involved in at all, but MPC Ready has been meeting regularly and frequently with the new assistant city manager. And that relationship seems to be going very well. And Menlo Park seems to have an interest in disaster preparedness. So all that's a good sign.
County Rob,
Yeah,
this just came up, so we want me to talk about this a little bit too.
I saw you were mentioned, so you can go ahead and talk.
No, go ahead.
I was contacted by the county executive about the, actually, it's a dual, it's the pre-medical group. He had asked me who I thought were the major stakeholders relative that should be invited relative to the meeting involving the dispatch. So I referred to the chief. The chief came up with a great list, and they had a meeting last night, and people are agreed this on that. So I kind of combined the accounting thing also. With the county board. Thank you.
Thank you. Reports and requests for directors, anyone? Chuck?
Nothing for me.
Rob? Gary?
No.
Rob?
No.
Okay, so number 13, president's report. So I do have a few things to say. The first thing that I wanted to address is I made a decision with regard to the ad hoc committees in the January meeting. We didn't really address the ad hoc committees, and so right now, as we've kind of gone through the year, through the year, and seeing what might need to be addressed, I'm going to actually form 2 ad hoc committees. The first one will be facilities with Robert and Gary, and Robert is the chair. And the second one will be the dispatch services, which will be Chuck and me, with me as the chair. And as a result of these 2 committees or ad hoc committees being formed, I'm going to dissolve the 3 that are still out there that we didn't address. And those 3 are the diversity, equity, and inclusion ad hoc committee, just because we're now really bringing that into the HR committee instead of, needing to meet on an ad hoc basis since we're discussing it, unless you think that we should have the ad hoc committee.
Well, we haven't had it really since last year.
I know, but it's still there, so I'm dissolving it. That's unless you think that we need it there. I don't think we need it. Okay, okay. And then the water companies and water pressure ad hoc committee will no longer be around. And ambulance services, that's going to be replaced with this dispatch services. And Chuck was on there before. So those 3 committees from last year, the 3 ad hoc committees will be dissolved. And then the 2 new ad hoc committees will be dispatch services and facilities.
I have a question.
Sure.
Since ambulances are involving the pre-medical, why are you forming an ad hoc committee when I'm on the pre-medical?
Because you're the liaison to the board, that board, you're on the JPA board. We did that.
It's kind of dual responsibilities because the pre-medical controls the ambulance services. So why would there be an ad hoc and another committee?
We had that last time for the ambulance services, and I was the liaison, just in case we had to talk about.
Yeah, but you had both, right?
No.
You
I was
didn't?
not on good. Jim and Chuck were on the ambulance services ad hoc.
I think it's a dual function.
Well, we can dissolve it later, but there are going to be some issues that the ad hoc committee can address. And so, but it was, well, you're on the JPA board, that's why this happened last time, because it's no different from how it was last year.
I think we were trying to separate the official roles of that JPA from the interests of the fire board. The fact is,
That'd be fine.
let me just say, Jim and I never, ever met because there was no reason to. So in a way, you're saying what was the purpose of it? And last year, there was no purpose. And this year, there's nothing to do with ambulances right now either. So there's nothing to do this year, really.
Well, the ambulance ad hoc is not gonna, that's gonna be dissolved, it's gonna be replaced with dispatch.
Right, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so, I also attended the Peninsula Volunteers March for Meals Community Champions Breakfast, as the chief mentioned. I also wanted to bring your attention to this Daily Post article. So this is that Alameda Dulles Santa Cruz Avenue task force that has been in existence for about 5 years. And it was just written about the second or the third community meeting that just happened tonight. Unfortunately, on the same night as the Menlo Park City Council meeting and also our fire board meeting. So the Fire Marshal John Johnston was there, and basically there was a plan that was approved by the task force that wasn't ideal, but it is what it is, and it was a compromise, and John Johnston has been working with the county to make sure that our emergency vehicles could go down Alameda Dulles Pulgas and Santa Cruz Avenue with as little impediment as possible, or imposition as possible. And so I guess tonight, I don't know, we just heard from John Johnston. Do you want to talk about that? I think that they ended up approving the plan, right?
It sounds that way. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of supporters on either side. And John basically said the meeting ended and went well. Project will still move forward. Supervisor Mueller may see if they can do a trial beforehand. Supporters came out after the voice of opposition kind of balanced it out. So it sounds like the project is still moving forward as it was proposed, which is fine from the fire district's perspective.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't impair our response times.
And that was always the big concern. Question, Chuck?
I just wanted to ask about the accuracy, because as I read the story, I read it in the paper yesterday's paper,
Yeah.
But my view of it kind of changed as I read different aspects of it. It suggested that we participated in this task force.
You did.
And that the task force recommended the diet. Which I thought, what, I'm surprised. And then I read a little further, it says, but we were concerned about it. Did we as a fire district vote on anything, or did we just talk about it? Well,
So I was brought on to the task force as a resident and also as a fire district person, right? But mainly as a resident who's in my neighborhood. But as a result of these meetings, I think when Peter Carpenter was the president, we approved primary emergency response routes. Or we named them, they were in a staff report. And so, and Harold was, so when I brought up the concern with the fire district and the potential impediments along these primary response routes as a result of these possible road diets, for lack of a better term, the county brought in Harold, and I told Harold we should go. And also, I think John Johnston was there, but it wasn't just us as emergency responders, it was also the sheriff's office and the CHP, because at the very first community meeting at Oak Knoll, they talked about this plan, and there was no concern or consideration of emergency response. So there were people who wanted Alameda Dulles Pulgas and even possibly Santa Cruz near the Y to be like Willow Road, right? And I was concerned about it, and so they invited Harold and others to be involved with just giving input. And so the bicycle, so this whole thing started when
I guess I'm good with that. Still not good.
okay.
Did we vote to restrict, or did we vote to restrict, or did we never vote?
We didn't have, but the task force voted.
What task force?
The county put together a task force.
And so the majority of members,
I voted for the reduction in lanes.
And this was actually better than what the original, I didn't want any reduction. Right, but that was, we had the bicycle coalition there, so what I was gonna start off with is that this whole thing got started because Supervisor Horsey at the time was going to remove parking spaces along Alameda Village Bolton and turn into bike lane across the street from Menlo Commons, and so a lot of residents at Menlo Commons and residents in that area were like, well, we need the parking spaces, and there was like a 2-day notice, right? So that's how this whole task force got developed. And
But the fire district itself never voted, never took a
no,
position.
we did.
And the article suggests we did take a position, that's all.
Yeah.
I think somewhere, and help you from along there, I think what I hear Chuck saying, and I think point of clarification. Miller Park was, fire district was mentioned. And as a caveat to the incentive that newspaper people tend to take on. And Fire Board President Virginia Crowley called the plan a compromise.
Well, they just interviewed me for that.
Did you say it was a compromise?
It was a compromise.
It sounded like we.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. It sounded like,
Asked
as
for it.
board president, you're gonna give a representation that we compromise. And reduce 4 lanes to 2 when we need it as an emergency.
No, that was not, that wasn't what they asked.
I think it really.
It's like a
I think
music
that
today.
if I
Yeah, I did
hear-
it, I did it.
Well, I think it's just the thing that we all know what reporters do.
There you go.
Right,
Robert's
that's
right.
And they tag, if they hadn't put board presidents or just in Crowley, I think that would have not made it look so official
Right.
at
That's
that point in
probably
time.
true.
And you know how they do it.
I didn't even know this article.
Sometimes newspapers use a confidential source or a,
I didn't.
Right.
Yeah,
Sometimes
so,
quoting the district and the title and
yeah.
that gives the right impression that.
that's true,
At
that's.
least you put the chief in here. That's okay.
Well, no, they actually asked about, what how the task force made the decision. I said it was basically a compromise. That's all I said. And so they told me to do the title and everything, so.
Yeah, also I understand, even though I wasn't here when the task force started, John Johnson is almost always at these meetings and
Yeah.
always represents the district's interests.
Yeah.
And that position is that we are never in favor of anything that impacts our response times negatively. So whether it's speed bumps or speed humps or traffic calming measures or anything, we're not in favor of them. That said, if the local government entity decides to do something anyway, we try and mitigate it as much as we can so that it can lessen the impact, like a speed hump.
And that's what happened here.
But just know, the fire district is always weighing in, even if we don't come to the board asking for a vote or a position on it, obviously, if we wanted a board letter, we would, but that's always the position of the fire district is do nothing to impair our response times.
And that was the original position.
I think if you read it, the article says that the view of the fire department is it's going to be
But we don't.
response times for paramedics, for ambulances trying to get to Stanford, and other things, but they're gonna do it anyhow, so.
Right.
And so we.
So that all those agencies will turn on their sirens and blast down the street, just like they always do.
And hope not to run over any bicycles.
Oh my God.
That would be a bad thing.
You know, the day there was 26,000 cars a day going through that Santa Cruz, Sand Hill, that area. Like,
Somebody's back there.
versus like 26 bikes a month. So anyway, so that kind of got resolved tonight, it sounds like. The other thing is, the next, so I asked the chief if when we started before COVID, we were gonna have meetings at some of our meeting stations. So we had that first meeting in 2020 at Station 2. So I'm hoping we can have the next meeting at Station 6. The main meeting.
We can.
Board meeting?
Yeah.
May,
May, yeah.
is it ready?
Station 6, downtown station.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, not 4, we think you do 4. And hopefully when 4.
Are you gonna be able to take our this equipment?
It won't be as good, but it will be, it'll be our trial run, see how we can do.
To be like,
So it's,
iPhone's going like that.
it won't be our super great smart board that we have there, but we'll get something that will
We're at
work.
a wall.
Yeah. And then we'll decide, especially with now the hybrid meeting environment, whether that works moving into the future or not, you know, for us. Yeah.
And so that's,
Michelle's like, "What are you doing to me?"
so that's all I got, and so, I'll look in that public comment number 2. I don't think you see that. I'll close public comment number 2, and we'll adjourn the meeting at 10. Thank you.